Hello. Hopefully y'all can see us. Everyone, please let me know. I'm going to double check on all. Okay, we're good on Twitch, so I can close that. Are we good on the YouTubes? Come on, YouTube, wake up. Wake up. Yeah, great. Okay, we're good. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're all having a great day. Welcome to another Sunday, another episode of Lorebeards. This one's going to be super exciting. Just a couple of little quick things before we just shoot off to the races. Which is to say that for those who are watching it and really enjoying it and following it very closely, the Tarmacon Brothers series will have another episode coming up on this Wednesday, which will be the Zinch episode. We had some issues come up last week of that I got super sick, and then we had technical issues and yada yada. So we'll be wrapping that up this week, though Andy had a super fucking cool idea of that we won't actually be wrapping it up with the Zinch brother technically. There's going to be, so to speak, a bonus episode. If Andy, I don't know if you want to elucidate on that for a moment.
Yeah, sure. Just as everybody's gathering for the corny goodness that we're going to have today. Next Wednesday, we're going to be obviously doing the Zinch brother. And then after that, on the Wednesday after, assuming that, again, we don't have technical issues, get sick, or I don't know, the heavens fall upon us. Next Wednesday after that, we'll be concluding the story of what all four brothers are, wrapping up, and we'll also be taking a good look at all the extra cool, super awesome stuff that people have been building over on the Discord channels, because there's not just been some really good ideas, some of which we've obviously discussed in the streams, but there's been some really cool art and really cool unit choices and just really cool shit. And I think that for many of you out there who may perhaps just watch YouTube or just listen to this as a podcast, you might be completely unaware of all the cool stuff that's out there. So I think spending a little bit of time having a little look at some of that is going to be well worth our time, because some of it's just lovely.
Yep. And speaking of the podcast, for those that prefer in that format, I did finally get caught up on all the episodes. So those will be coming out over the following days. And I have started uploading all of the Tarmacon Brothers as just bonus episodes. So they won't be like strictly episode lumbered. They'll just be a bonus for people that want to listen to those. But should be a lot of fun. But I think with all that out of the way, we're good to get started today. So we did another vote. And unfortunately, all of my fellow ogre lovers let me down this week. But that's okay. Life goes on. And we have instead, we're going to be focusing on the Blood God Khorne and his realms. So we're going to be talking at first about his brass citadel. But there is extremely high likelihood that we will wander outside of the brass citadel and explore other places around the realm of Khorne and the various things that fall under his influence, which is going to be pretty fun. I think this is going to be our first real episode delving into the realm of chaos itself.
For me, this one is super exciting because all of our previous episodes have been about characters inside the Warhammer world, or, for example, locations, or perhaps just themes and processes and magic and how things work inside the Warhammer world. But this one is a bit of a step in a different direction, because we are, for the first time ever, stepping into the realm of chaos itself. The realm of chaos, which, as we've discussed in several of our previous streams, is a very different place. The etheric realms, so to speak, in comparison to the material realms. A place where emotion, a place where time itself kind of breaks down, a place where everything is just different. Nevertheless, it has very real places, very real concepts, very real stuff that we're going to be diving into today, particularly, obviously, with our focus upon Khorne's goodies. It's also, I think, potentially an opportunity for us to just delve into some of the more, let's say, esoteric lore as to exactly how do demons work with this and mortals, because it's worth noting as we dive deep into everything that is Khorne's super famous fortress that mortals have been there. Mortals have been there, have visited, and have left. And contrary to everybody's opinion, not necessarily have left with their minds completely shattered. Sometimes they have arrived back in the material realms to explain what has occurred to them before they're often burnt for heresy, because the realm of chaos isn't exactly what everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun little side stories we'll get into particular individuals who've, thanks to their tales, we've learned so much about the realms of chaos because the Dark Gods have essentially allowed tourists in from time to time, which is a really interesting thing to walk away with. That you have like the Liber Chaotica is quite literally written by a character who starts to have dreams where he's allowed to walk around and observe the realm of chaos so that he can write down his findings. And there have been other characters who have penned other great maps or articles as well about their experiences, which is really, really fun. And also is one of those moments that kind of paints the Dark Gods in a bit more of a outside of universe, kind of an amusing light, but in universe is a genuinely pretty terrifying thing because you wonder what the overall objective is, because there is a purpose to it. It's not just like a random whim, so to speak. Or is it? But that's half the fun with
chaos. It's also worth noting that the realms of chaos in particular are not just inconsistent because of small c or big C chaos. One of the often forgotten about the realms of chaos is that they are quite literally 40k style, always at war. Always. Always, always. It never stops. There is a constant push and pull of conflict inside the realm of chaos, where each one of the chaos gods is striving for ascendancy over the others. And at points, this means that, for example, the good old Citadel we're about to discuss has been besieged and has been almost taken on more than one occasion. And it's not until Khorne himself steps in that that no longer is going to be the case. And as realms are conquered, they twist and reshape and become something new. So don't think of the realm of chaos as just this, oh, there's these gardens here, and there's this lovely thing over there, and there's this big staircase over there, and there's this big shining citadel over here. Yeah, no, it's all in a state of total flux. And anything that we have that's written down very clearly that states, and here you will find X, is not going to be the case should anyone actually visit there, because time itself doesn't really exist over on the realm of chaos side. It's both there and not there. It's both a state of war and not a war. And there's a constant push and pull between each of the chaos powers. So be aware that as we go through the course of describing various locations and almost certainly diverging off into different parts of what is offered by the Khorne version of the realm of chaos, that everything we say is equally undermined by the reality of the place, where we say, and this is here, that might not be there should you have characters out there that choose to visit the place, should you have weird seer visions or anything else, because the realm of chaos is in a state of total flux. The only thing you can generally say with any clear certainty, and it's good for this particular stream, is that Khorne almost always has by far the largest section of the realm of chaos for itself, because it is ultimately the blood god, the war god, the great conqueror, and the great conquering demons pushing forward at the various peripheries of its realm are always, almost always, going to be pushing Khorne's realm out further than any of the others. Having said that, though, as we already mentioned at the beginning, Khorne himself has had to take the battlefield at points because the loss of control over his domain reached a point where he could no longer sit still and do nothing. Having said that, though, he's pretty much the only god that does that. The other three don't generally take to the battlefield. They're not like Khorne. Khorne likes to get a little bit personal every once in a while.
Yep. So before we get any further with that, we're just gonna knock out super chats and stuff right here at the beginning, which just as a reminder for anyone that may be new to the show or needs a fresh reminder, we take these in batches between like various segments. That way they don't interrupt everything we're in the midst of doing. So we're gonna knock out the ones that came in really, really early, and then we're gonna head into discussion, and we're gonna start at the center of Khorne's realm with his grand brass citadel, and we're gonna work our way outwards. And see how far we get. So, Biofoot, the Fishmen allowed this episode 1 to air. I don't think the Fishmen necessarily. Well, you know what? Sure, why not? Yeah, the Fishmen are behind everything. They're the controlling elite of the Warhammer.
And for those of you who are wondering out there, what the hell are these Fishmen that come up every episode? We did do a stream about them, who they are, what they are, where they come from, and where their realm may or may not extend to in a previous episode. So do go check back to our previous episodes and you'll find out about them.
That was also a really fun one. That was probably the most impressive one when it came to me and Andy stretching about 3 paragraphs worth of text for an hour each.
Yeah, totally.
Nasir, Andy, fellow diabetic, make sure your blood isn't too sweet for Khorne is bitter.
So true.
Sean Schultz, what song does a brass frog make? Rivet.
Rivet.
Thank you. Queek says, Trade Lord Grease's Tribe Stealer, Drake Crush, Gatecrasher, Hordemaster, Goldtooth, the shockingly obese shall rise. Well, he probably won't, actually, if you want to be technical. He's too rich to rise. But he will languidly bellow his distaste from his throne of knowledge
on his behalf.
Yeah. Why should I have to rise? I'm too rich to rise. He is. He truly is. I see your background is blue. You know who else is blue? Crimlo. Long live Crimlo. Bring back the frog lord of Skeggy. Never.
Currently blue. My room is still empty since I've just moved in. I'm still at the point where I'm not officially moved in, so we don't have the license completely from the council yet for this to be the place. But we're all set up to be in, and we're allowed to be in here. But I'm not meant to decorate it or do anything with it until then, although I am itching to do so.
Blue Chris, after you've scrubbed all the brass at the Citadel, then you may go back to the material realm. Oh, that sounds like a horrible deal. He summons mortals just to be the cleaning service. Dunman, given the number of forges in Khorne's realm, surprised he doesn't have more biomechanical or armored demons like Juggernauts, or even any name character associated with blacksmithing and so on. So this is actually a pretty interesting topic that came up a lot in our Khorne Tamarkan Brothers stream, and that's something that we're actually going to talk about quite a bit here in a little bit with the Brass Citadel, is that Khorne does have a significant focus on forges and armories and smithing. And it's something that is pretty not well explored by a lot of the characters within Games Workshop. It's generally something that exists in the background. I do find it funny that even in Age of Sigmar, the first like big smith character that we've gotten is an orc from the Iron Jaws instead of like, I don't know, any of the other races, which is pretty interesting, to be honest. But yeah, it is odd. There's a lot of concepts with Khorne that Games Workshop could explore. They've set up the lore to explore. They just don't, which is odd when it comes to like engineers and smiths and ranged fighters and artillerists and all sorts of other different kinds of warfare.
Broadly, just to add on that, as we've discussed in some of the previous episodes, particularly that are close to the Chaos Gods and Khorne, Khorne used to have a very strong association with technology and weapons that are deemed to be linked to technology. So you'll find if you go back to the original Realm of Chaos books, you would find things like las cannons, other 40k objects coming into your Khorne armies. And they had bolt guns. They had, again, chaos versions of them. So all mutated and weird and looking like they came out of a David Lynch movie or some equivalent. But nevertheless, they still had tech. And that's what they had to replace magic. However, as time went by, the desire to keep Warhammer completely discrete from Warhammer 40k and to keep 40k discrete from Warhammer rose. They were attempting to keep each of their IPs nice and clean. That being the case, anything that was exceedingly 40k-ish was removed from Warhammer. And we were left with basically 3 Chaos Gods that had one giant advantage, and Khorne that no longer had its giant advantage, which was tech. That was broadly removed from all of the Khorne armies, meaning that Khorne was both left in this position where it was frequently described as the most powerful of the 4 Chaos Gods, by far the most capable in terms of going to war and looking at their army and going, I'll just shoot it. I'll just shoot them. For anyone who's played Warhammer out there, you'll know that Khorne is basically a close combat army. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be both an excellent army at close combat and ranged warfare. It was basically the war army, and it no longer is. Now it's very much the frenzying, angry army. So be aware that originally it was quite different, but all of the trappings of that still exist in the lore. So we have forges, we have weapons, we have great effective tanks being described inside the stories. But when it comes to the battlefields, they are still pretty goddamn basic.
Yeah, and it's interesting how there are little snippets that have managed to survive. You know, like the chainsword is a really famous example that has survived. And obviously you have the skull cannons of Khorne and like your juggernauts and stuff. But funny enough, Khorne is actually the only faction that I really find the soul grinder to be like very appropriate. And it's like, yeah, I can absolutely see Khorne fielding one of those. Whereas for the other 3 dark gods, you kind of squint and go, I don't know about that, but all right. but this is just one of those interesting things. Who'd fall to Khorne first? Sontarans or Klingons? I don't have an opinion on this because I don't know.
The Sontarans are altogether too fixed and rigid. The Klingons are far more, let's say, passion-driven. So out of those two, the Klingons.
There you go. Hey, man, you know what Valkia eats? Corn tortillas. Ha, 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 ha. Corn chips. She runs a banging Tex-Mex place on the side. You and Evans, first time catching you guys live, couldn't ask for a better topic. Does the Brass Citadel have some sort of Coliseum or gladiator pit for his favorite champions, bloodletters and bloodthirst, etc.? So the Citadel itself doesn't, but almost the entirety of Khorne's realm kind of is a big Coliseum, which we'll get into in a minute. The blasted plains, which are the area it makes up the majority of Khorne's realm, is quite literally just a giant fuck you battlefield. Where
it's also
everybody fights.
Sorry, pardon me, I thought you were done. It's also worth noting that for all there is not, at least in the descriptions as they currently stand, and you must realize that the Brass Citadel hasn't had a great deal written about it. We're not talking about, say, Altdorf here. But the Brass Citadel is a place where many are brought to prove their worth. And they are possibly even brought forth before Khorne itself. It seems incorrect to call it he, but brought forth before Khorne. And whenever you are proving yourself with Khorne, it's very rarely, trying to build a nice house or, trying to do a bit of knitting. It's generally having a big scrap. So whilst there is no particular Colosseum or gladiatorial pit, you could argue that the entire thing, to a degree, is that anyway. In the same way you can argue that the entire realm is, to a degree, that anyway.
Yeah, he does. Khorne very explicitly does have, like, what we could describe as contests where he'll summon forth mortal champions from the material plane to fight in these battles where the vast majority of them lose and die horribly, and then feel Khorne's I don't know if you would call it displeasure, but not his affection, while those who succeed will either be risen up as a demon prince, or if you're poor Arbal, you just get to sit around going, I can't even lose here. What a shame. This is boring. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, Heimer Schmidt. Thank you. I don't know what inspired you to do that, but all right. I feel like that just popped into your head and you just decided to put it on there. What is the first co-op Total War campaign with Andy and Sotek? I don't know.
Soon, I suppose, because I'm in my room and my internet, as we can see from this stream, appears to be working. So soonish, I suppose. I'm going to be trying my first forays online from this PC in about the next week or two. I'm going to probably start off with just some simple mapping, just to check that everything runs nice and smoothly, beyond just running through things through StreamYard, but trying some other bits. I'm assuming that it does. Yeah, sure.
Yep. So stay tuned. Darius Rhodes, do greater demons and demon princes have corporeal avatars that are weaker in the mortal realm, like gods like Orion or Darkseid or the new gods from DC?
No. But heavy butt on this. That's going a bit nurgle. With its heavy butt. But a heavy butt on that. The greater demons and the demon princes, when they manifest in the material plane, they are not the same as what they are when they're in the realm of chaos. You could argue this is one of the reasons why they are so desperate to destroy the material realm. That would, I think, be relatively weak, but you could certainly argue that. When they are manifest in the material plane, the more magic there is, the more powerful they become. So it's not so much that they have themselves corporeal avatars. They don't. And they don't so much manifest inside other entities. Generally speaking, they don't. But there are lots of ways around that. Possession exists inside the Warhammer world where you could possess somebody else. But generally, a greater demon or demon prince possessing a mortal kills it very quickly, super quickly. If it can get inside you, you're dead. It takes something very, very special for it to control, for it to last in the material realm for any length of time. And I recommend, if you want to have some more discussion on that, go check our Galrauch, I can't call it Galrauch, it makes me feel sick. But Galrauch, I did it. The Galrauch stream that we did, where a dragon is possessed by a greater demon of Tzeentch, and the long-term effects that has. It's also worth noting that you have another alternative way of getting a greater demon into material realm, and that's by binding it into an artifact. Normally, this doesn't work with greater demons because they just don't let it happen. But some of them allow it to happen for one reason or another, or they're cursed to by their major deity, or whatever.
See your Malice Darkblade.
There is always a reason that these things may occur. And when they do, you tend to find that they are massively curtailed so that they can still interact with and not destroy the material realm around them. Because to do so is effectively to wipe out the material realm about where they are. And that would, in many respects, be argued as a corporeal avatar that is much weaker. Sure, if you wish. But it's basically bound artifacts, possession, or arriving. And arriving in the material realm means they generally don't last long. But there's lots of magic. They'll grow more powerful and last longer.
Yeah, there's actually a really cool example. If you go read the Tyrion and Teclis trilogy, there's a scene that the author does a really good job of describing how the greater demon Nakari, how it perceives itself within the realm of chaos and then coming into the material world and what that does to how it perceives itself and everything around it. And it's a really interesting transformation of you're taking an entity that exists in like a really different form of reality and was born in that reality, and then you kind of squish it down to fit in under the constraints of the material plane. And it's a really, really fun set of paragraphs that explains how Nakari goes through that experience. So check that out. It's a really good book. Set of books. Biofoot, earnest request to bring on Doug for 2+ if we ever do AOS stream. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think we'll ever be able to get around to AOS because I'm pretty sure me and Andy will be dead before we get done with fantasy. Just a guess, but I feel pretty confident about it.
Yeah.
But thank you though. Donovan, semi-related topic given with the chariots of corn. What actually are gore beasts and why don't we see them outside chariots? Okay, that's actually a good question. That just to take a very brief aside because it's not super related to what we're doing here, but gore beasts were introduced very late in Warhammer Fantasy. They were introduced in 8th edition, and they're these big reptilian gorilla monster things that basically exists up in the Chaos Wastes. One thing that I know we've talked about this on some prior streams, and I know Andy went into a big thing about it, but to reiterate very heavily, the Chaos Wastes are not a wasteland in the sense that they're dead and there's nothing there. It's actually super the opposite. The Chaos Wastes are often boundless with life, but the life that's there is really extreme and really crazy. And that's where you get like your toad dragons and your gore beasts, where you have these really spooky creatures that because they live so close to the northern gate, they have gone through a pretty significant amount of change. And it will take a lot of features of creatures that might have existed naturally and will dial it up to 13. And their features get exaggerated and they often become very dangerous, horrifying monster creatures. And gore beasts are just an example of that some of the northern tribes have managed to capture and strap a chariot to it and ride it into battle to crush everything in front of them.
As you do. In fact, I think it's worth making something really clear now, because this is something we're going to have to make clear at some point. And that's the term Realm of Chaos. Because it's a term that's used for more than one thing in the Warhammer universe. And people sometimes get confused. And that includes the writers. So I think taking a little bit of a moment to clarify what the Realm of Chaos is worth doing. So the Realm of Chaos is the realm that lies beyond our realm. Our realm, like we live in the Warhammer world, that lives beyond the material realm. That would be better. So you've got the material realm, and you have a parallel dimension, the Realm of Chaos. And the Realm of Chaos, well, actually isn't all of that realm. It's just a part of it. It is quite literally the realm of chaos within it. The Aether, which is infinite in size and infinite in scope, limited only by imagination and by emotion. The Aether includes all the other gods, other spiritual entities, things that aren't chaos, but are etheric. In the 40k realm, the equivalent realm of chaos is effectively just chaos. But in Warhammer, it absolutely and expressly is not at all in any way, shape, or form. The realm of chaos is very much where the chaos gods reside. It is sometimes referred to in some books as the realms of chaos, because we have more than one chaos god, obviously. We have more than 4, in fact. The 4 are just the great 4 most powerful of them. But there are many, many, many more chaos gods than just those 4, in Warhammer anyway. And then moving beyond that, we have all the other gods whose realms are just as big, or in some cases, arguably bigger. And this is something that sometimes those who very much focus on the 40k side of things really get confused about. So number one, the realm of chaos is a part of the greater aether or the immaterial realm, but it is often used to describe the entire realm. So be aware of that. That's number one. But there's a third definition as well. And you'll find this definition on multiple maps and used in games where they will point northwards and say, to the realm of chaos. Now, some writers have described that as being nothing more than pointing towards the gate, where you can then effectively move from the material realm into the realm of chaos. That's not what those maps are saying. They are referring to the chaos wastes as the realm of chaos. And this is something that many writers have done and got confused by, particularly when they move into, say, a book like the Demons of Chaos books, where there's 7th edition, there's 8th edition, there's an earlier one. So you've got all your demons, and they all come from the realm of chaos, and then they look at the map of the realm of chaos, and they think that's a map of the chaos wastes. And multiple writers have made that mistake. They're usually corrected, but not always. So be aware we have 3 different definitions for the realm of chaos. Number 1 is the aether part where the chaos gods live. Number 2 is all of the aether. And number 3 is, and almost always incorrectly used as, another term for the chaos wastes in both the north and the south. So as we're using it, we're probably going to be leaning strongly into it's the bit of the aether where the chaos gods live, because that's what we're talking about. But be aware that it's quite possible when you're reading through books yourself at your own pace, you might read a reference and go, oh, they found this in the realm of chaos, and warriors were wandering around the realm of chaos. And what they're actually saying is they were wandering around the chaos wastes. And in the chaos wastes, just as a nice full stop or period, if you wish, on this particular point, in the chaos wastes, because magic is so strong, bleeding out of the chaos gates, sometimes the realm of chaos literally touches into the chaos wastes in the north, meaning that places like the Brass Citadel, or alternatively, what's not the Impossible City, it's the Crystal Labyrinth. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Regardless, these places can almost materialize in the material realm because there's so much magic weakening reality. So the realms of chaos do sometimes cross over into the chaos wastes, but they absolutely are not the same as or synonymous with the chaos wastes unless a writer has decided they are.
Yep. Welcome to Warhammer.
Welcome to Warhammer.
Welcome to Warhammer. Where all the terms are made up and nobody knows what they mean. Laughing God. Corn feels like a god Games Workshop gave up on terms of being creative with him. At least that's my experience with him. Last time Corn really felt fresh was the Blood Pact from Gaunt's Ghost. Yeah, I mean, I could see that interpretation of it. I will say that I have enjoyed Age of Sigmar Corn a lot. He does a lot of fun things and has expanded significantly. Where that, like, they really leaned into a lot of the priestly angles, which gives Corn a lot more to do. And he's got stuff going on. I am very curious what they're going to do with Corn in the old world, because they have taken him in different directions for 40k and Age of Sigmar. So presumably they're going to do something with him. I just don't know what, and I'm really interested to see what it's going to be, because he can't just be the melee god. He needs more going on outside of just that sphere.
You say that, but he has been for about 20 years in Warhammer.
It's just boring.
It's not boring per se. It's just unimaginative.
Yeah, it's
the god used to be more. The god is used in more ways in other settings, and in Warhammer, the poor old Corn has often just been patted down, because they really don't want to think about the greater ways that Corn may manifest. Because if they go back on the old lore, which is often where they go to, whenever they go, what could we do? Why don't we look at the old stuff? They go, holy shit, it's 40k. Crap, we can't do that. So you tend to find that they just press skip, and they don't think about it too much.
It'll be interesting to see what they do. That guy, I've been wondering this for a while. Do skulls have to literally be brought to the skull throne, or is there some metaphysical mumbo jumbo? I would say yes. Would be the answer. Unfortunately, it depends. It depends on a lot of factors, but unfortunately, the answer is yes, because it depends. Sometimes.
Do they have to be literally brought there? I would argue that if anyone was literally taking a skull there, it would be because they were of such extraordinary importance that the skull itself was from an entity where its soul, which is the skull, is a component of the material realm's soul. There is quite a lot about exactly what comprises your soul, but your material components are a part of your soul. And just small skulls, they can very easily be slain and then bubble up into the great carpet of skulls that lies not just in the Brass Citadel, but everywhere else around the good old realm of Khorne itself. And they will just bubble up. And I can imagine in some places that skulls are literally bubbling up as wars are going on and bursting to the surface, almost like fountains of skulls and new bones arriving. Having said that, though, the big ones, if you take, say, for example, a big old dragon, that skull is effectively soul stuff. And that stuff is in the material realm. The only way to get it over there will be to literally take it there. So in some cases, I would say yes, because it has to. And in other cases, the metaphysical mumbo jumbo, so to speak, will be more than enough. Slaying in the name of Khorne, killing that individual, and the etheric reflection of that from the soul will pop up over in the realm of Khorne. You are now a slave to arguably Khorne for the rest of your eternal existence. That's probably not going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and there are, and as we are talking about the Brass Citadel in particular, there are a number of characters associated with it whose whole gimmick is that they go out and grab skulls and bring them back. But we will talk about those in a little bit. Is that why Manfred's always screaming that Gash was weak? Was he actually trying to help his grandpa? Have we been wrongfully hating on him? Shame on us. I don't think he means it as a term of endearment and warning, Hammond. I don't think he does. Magladroth, are bloodletters the souls of deceased mortal champions, or are they just creations of Khorne like other demons? So this, unfortunately, this kind of falls into another yes. Of that, the Dark Gods do have the ability to turn mortal souls into demons. It has been demonstrated through like power. Nurgle does it really often through Nurgle's Rot, turning people into plague bearers. I would say the vast majority of demons that you're going to encounter are purely like little fragments, probably of the god broken off, but are all of them? Probably not. It depends.
So there are as many answers to this as there are writers who try to tackle it. And every writer who's tackled it has generally taken their own direction. But if you want an overarching metaphysical look at this, the answer is yes, 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 and yes. Because some people might say, oh, it's just shards of Khorne. Where does Khorne come from? And Khorne is nothing more than all the souls that are close to and dragged into the great, if you wish, maelstrom that is Khorne. If you want to view the realm of chaos as great maelstroms that each god represents. If you want to view it a bit more materially, as in you can imagine it and see it as it is what it is, everything that has been dedicated to Khorne that becomes a part of Khorne is a bit of Khorne, and that is what becomes the demons. So the answer is sure, yes, it's both. And they are not antithetical to each other. They actually work in sympathy with each other. So it's a bigger picture, and you could tell a story that is almost all of the variations or permutations of how this could manifest. A soul that is slain with Khorne's name on the lips of the champion. That soul's fragments go flying off, dedicated to Khorne now, and they are now one of the lost and the damned in the service of the blood god forever. Or a different way of doing that is that soul fragment, as it goes over there, just joins the great swirl that is Khorne and becomes at some point the fragmented parts of the first new birth of a new bloodletter. There are lots of different stories you can make here, and none of them, I think, should be categorically pinned down as the only way of doing it, because that lessens the background. The realm of chaos is supposed to be completely alien, something you can't understand, and any attempt to understand it and to pin it down is ultimately going to fail.
Gods are always better with copious amounts of wiggle room.
Indeed.
And not just the chaos gods, just gods in general. Anything ether. And I'll note that in like the last Demons of Chaos book, the writer did a good job of saying that the bloodletters are believed to be mortal followers that served Khorne and then they died and stuff. So the answer is
sure, all of the above.
Yeah. Ricky Chapman, if the current rate of skulls added to Khorne's throne, do you think Khorne will eventually not be able to get down from it? As hilarious as that would be, luckily for him, he is a god and etheric entity, so he doesn't have to worry too much about it. But it would be really funny if there was a story of him getting stuck up there and yelling at someone to get a brass ladder because he can't get down.
Yeah, as we'll get on to the internal description of the Great Citadel. It has space.
Yeah. So, with that,
headroom.
I'm going to put a pause on these just because we're 30 minutes in and we technically haven't really even gotten started. So we're going to get started and then we'll come back to the rest of those after that. So, the brass...
That is just so...
Yes, trust me, I cannot forget which one I left off on because it's a Hammond super chat. It'll be easy to remember. So, the Brass Citadel. So, we're going to start at the core of Khorne's realm with his personal fortress. So, the Brass Citadel, which if you play Total War Warhammer 3, you're probably familiar with it as it's very iconic from a lot of the promotional material and also shows up as like the big final battle in Khorne's realm when you do the Khorne story quest. But it is a absolutely fucking colossal fortress that sits at the center of Khorne's realm. And is there its depiction in Total War is really fun, where it kind of has like the symbol of Khorne imbued into the top of this gigantic fortress, like a big spike sticking out of the ground. One of the things that's really interesting about it is that some descriptions will just like, oh, this is where Khorne resides, but it's not just Khorne's throne room. He has a throne room at the center of the fortress, but it is a full goddamn fortress that kind of obeys, we're in the ether, laws of physics don't apply. This place is fucking titanic. It is massive. I mean, Khorne himself is a big boy god. He is large, even by the standards of other gods. He has a sword that's supposed to be able to crack planets and other stupid nonsense. And he chills out in the center, but there are countless rooms into this place. Most of them, and like we talked about earlier, paints a much different view of Khorne. You might expect like, oh, they're going to be like fighting pits and blood rooms and all this stuff. Actually, no, it's usually more armories and smithies and rooms where weapons of insane divine proportions are being crafted. It talks about ornate cannons and specialized machines for different kinds of warfare that are always being constructed and built and designed in these other rooms. And to further go on in that, one of the things that I find really interesting is that in the 8th edition book, especially, it calls out that in Khorne's throne room, there are three major features, but the one I'm going to talk about now is that obviously you have the Mound of Skulls, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but he has an anvil. In Khorne's throne, off on the only side chamber, he has a titanic anvil that only he uses. No one else is allowed to use it. And he doesn't use it very often, but it is said to essentially only exist for if Khorne is going to gift someone something incredibly powerful. Probably a good example being the likes of Destroyer, which is the blade wielded by Arbal the Undefeated, of which is said to be it's the only one of its kind in existence, and it is only given to the greatest champion that Khorne favors at that time, Arbal being the individual who's held on it for the last several thousand years. But it's a blade that comes with the curse of that if you ever lose while wielding it, really bad things are going to happen to you, and your death is, you're going to hope for death after it's done with you and racking you with change. But what's fascinating to me is that Khorne himself is a smith, which is not often super talked about. It's just kind of it's literally just a throwaway line in the discussion of the Brass Citadel, is this huge implication that he's a smithing god, which a lot of people don't associate with him, which I find super interesting. The other major facet of his throne room that's worth talking about for a moment is that Khorne is surrounded by 8 pillars. So there are 8 pillars surrounding Khorne, and each of them is inscribed with a single commandment of Khorne's philosophy or Khorne's impact on the universe. And each of them contains essentially a tenet about concepts of martial prowess or warfare or slaughter. And he sits at the core of it almost like almost like I'm trying to think of the best words to describe it, but he sits at the center of this 8-pointed star, essentially, which is really interesting to think about, considering that we usually tend to associate that concept very much with Chaos Undivided, but it tends to very much be Khorne's domain instead, which is an interesting choice from writers at that point, because man, does it make things confusing at times.
Yeah, it does. And it's made it confusing for writers on more occasions than I care to warrant. We've had entire arguments about how to use the number 8 behind the scenes, whether it should be used purely as something that is representative of Khorne, or whether it should be used as something that is representative of Chaos as a whole. And some would argue it's both, because the story of Chaos and its great rebellion against the other gods, that's one way of referring to what happens right at the dawning of time, is very much the story of Khorne. He is the most powerful of them. This is often forgotten. This is often sidelined because people just don't like to think of it that way. But Khorne is always placed in the number 1 slot. That doesn't mean that number 2 is very far behind number 1. And that doesn't mean number 2 is consistent. But the number 1 is almost always Khorne. Number 4 is almost always Slaanesh. Number 2 is almost always Nurgle. But not always. And Khorne is powerful, exceedingly so. And his throne room very much reflects this. And I think that we cannot move away from what Sotek was just describing there. Let's go to some brass tack basics here, since we're starting in the very center. On the very center of the, I know, I couldn't help myself. Some brass tack center details at the very center. So at the center of this citadel, and this is the center of it, this is not the only chamber. There are said to be an entire labyrinth's worth of other chambers in here. But the core chamber is so big you cannot see the top of it. And the citadel itself extends significantly beyond the top of this particular chamber. The 8 great pillars ascend into darkness and beyond. The great murk that lies beyond that. And surrounded this enormous throne on all sides are the skulls and the bones of the fallen. And these are not just those dedicated to Khorne. These are ones who have been killed in Khorne's name. Skulls for the Skull Throne. And they are everywhere. And I think it's worth noting, on top of these 8 commandments that sit on the great 8 pillars that lie there as well, we have Khorne sitting in the center, where he very rarely moves from. He only moves if there's going to be a fight that he's personally going to take care of, or if there is something that he has to do. But most of the time, he just yeah. He, however, is vocal. And Khorne, as he sits up there, is noted for having actual details that are his. Some of the other gods are sometimes detailed in very different ways, but Khorne is almost universally detailed as having dog features, great hound-like features, and his face is a mess of scars and broken up bits and massive teeth. And Khorne, when he bellows, that's his basic voice. And when he turns to full rage, the very edges of reality blister around him. The other detail that's worth noting is that there is viscera and blood everywhere. This is the blood god, after all. And this is not a nice, clean, tidy place. This is a classic example of what most games, when they play computer games here, when they go, I wonder what it looks like if we ever go on to the other side. I know, it's all bony and bloody and horrible.
Yeah, if you play any of the Diablo games. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much Khorne's realm. And at the heart of this great vaulted ceiling room is Khorne himself, who surrounds himself in the blood and the viscera. But he's not alone in there. But as I was going to say, I do think it's worth seriously repeating that Khorne is not just a warrior. And I know Sotek's already said it, but I think it is worth strongly repeating. Khorne forges. He doesn't do it often, but he is a master of all aspects of war. And that's not just frenzying rage, which he very much embodies. It's also tactical capability, strategic capability, and the ability to actually put together the weaponries of war. And he himself has done the lot. He commands generally the forces of chaos. It's been mentioned more than one time that Khorne is the one that, when it comes to coming to war, is the one that leads the others. Because he knows more about it than anyone else. In the same way that Tzeentch handles the magic. Because he knows more about it than anyone else. That's his realm. Khorne's realm is war. And he is not a ravening, rabid dog. That is how he is perceived. And that's how many of his followers go. Because Khorne's power, his great rage,
it's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. But that doesn't mean there is not an extraordinary intellect that lies behind it. And whilst, yes, many of his demons are nothing more than a tide of blood that spills forward with iron flesh and terrible weapons, that in no way means that they are moving mindlessly. They are not. They are moving with purpose. They're moving with structure. And a lot of Khorne's rage lies in when it does go wrong. When Khorne has to take to the battlefield himself, it's gone wrong.
Yeah,
He's one of the things servants who do this for him.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting is that, like Andy said, his servants are also more diverse than we get to see on the battlefields as well. I misspoke earlier of that. He does have genuine furnace demons. That's what they're called. They're the furnace demons that operate his anvil when he himself is not at it, and are constantly producing new weapons and armor for his champions to take into battle. So he has all these demons who warfare is not their purpose. They prepare for war as opposed to fighting it, which is something a lot of people would not expect Khorne to have. But like Andy said, the other thing about the Brass Citadel that is really important is that it's a citadel because of defense. It has been laid siege to multiple times. Despite the fact that Khorne is the big badass, like Andy said, the tide between the dark gods, the great game, is ever shifting. And there have been times where the other powers have managed to lay siege, and he has to actually get up and go out there, not only by himself, but with an honor guard of bloodthirsters that are all armed to the teeth. And he kicks ass and takes names pretty much every single time. Now, what's interesting is that he is the only one, like Andy said earlier, the Dark Gods, that does this. He's the only one to get personally involved. It notes that the other three don't want to take the risk or are otherwise preoccupied to the point where they just can't be bothered, which allows Khorne to often be the overall greatest power, because if he decides to get involved, there's nothing that can stop him. Though it does provide vulnerabilities. There is, of course, the rather humorous incident of when Khorne did march out of his fortress, only for the Changeling to sneak into the Brass Citadel, and he sealed the door shut from the inside. So Khorne had to lay siege to his own citadel to smash the doors down to get back inside, which is hilarious. Just as a fun aside. Some other notes about it is that as far as its defenses go, the Brass Citadel is surrounded by a moat of boiling blood. That's meant so that ground forces cannot get across it. It has a drawbridge that is meant to protect it from assault. It has ramparts that are guarded by legions of demons. And up here, the rarely famous Bloodletter character, Skulltaker, or Uzul, which is very confusing because there's a number of demons named Uzul, and there's also a number of demons named Skulltaker, just for funsies. But the famous Skulltaker, the actual special character, is well noted for he takes skulls of people that he has tracked down and killed in Khorne's name and impales their skulls along the spikes jutting out from like the parapets and the overhangings of the citadel as a warning to those who would attack it. There are gargoyles that have molten metal for blood that patrol and guard the citadel, that can move in the case of needing to defend it, and can vomit their molten blood at enemies. It's a genuine fortress with all of the defenses that you could imagine and then some, which also opens the really fun imaginings of what kind of battles have taken place here.
Yeah, I think one thing that is worth, as we are moving from the internal to the rest of the Citadel, worth noting is what is Khorne and what does this represent? Because the Citadel of Brass, as it currently stands, Brass Citadel, it is nothing more than an etheric thing. It's not something that's material. It's not a place that you, strictly speaking, visit in the greater sense of things. It is a thing that exists because it is a manifestation of Khorne's will. So it exists, completely exists. So it is a place you can visit, but it exists because Khorne exists. And this is where most people get Khorne wrong. they think of Khorne as a frenzying idiot. Let's make it blunt. But that's not Khorne. That's his followers. That's the people who do what Khorne wants. Khorne is the general. Khorne sits in the center and he orchestrates. And when it doesn't go the way it's meant to, because his followers fail or because of whatever else, he gets pissed. Really, really pissed. So he's an angry general. And when it really goes wrong and his forces have failed him, whatever, he has to take to the field himself. And that is what makes him more angry than anything else, because that should never occur. It's always blood for the blood god. It's always trying to do stuff for the blood god. The followers of Khorne are Khorne's puppets, for want of a better description. If you want to actually lay it out for what they are, they're his army, his enormous army. And unlike most other gods, his followers don't emulate him. Most gods generally have their followers emulate them, be like the god. This is not the case for Khorne. For Khorne, it's impress the god. Do stuff that the god wants to see. It is make Khorne see you and go, yes, you are worthy of being a leader of one of my armies, of effectively pushing forward in this direction in my name. Khorne is the blood god and the general. And this is something that almost everybody misses. They generally think of him as the ravening, snarling beast that, for reasons unknown to anyone, just sits there snarling away on a throne for no obvious, unanswerable, or understandable reason at all. Because he's just sitting there, I'm angry. What the hell is he doing? He's a general. And always has been, right from the very beginning of the Warhammer world, when Khorne first invades along with the other Chaos Gods. And at this point, he's just one of many Chaos Gods that rebel. The four great gods that come later are the ones that survive these wars, and the ones that rise up above all the rest. And he was the general back then as well. He always has been. He's the general. He creates the weapons. He builds the armies. He is ultimately the perfect soldier's god, but he has lost it because he's a chaos god. The chaos gods, as we know, are freaking mental. He has completely lost it. And his followers have, if anything, taken the madness far, far further than that. So it's a nice way to try and view Khorne beyond the simple, he is the god of frenzying, blood-crazed idiots. He is exactly that. But that doesn't mean that that's what Khorne is. He is a much more complicated character who has not just intellect, but is actually doing something. He doesn't just sit on the throne. He's playing the great game.
Yeah.
He is the most powerful in the great game. And this is the thing that really most people don't get. He beats Tzeentch all the time. If Tzeentch was the great manipulator, the great cunning one who always won, he would be the most powerful of the gods. He very much isn't. Khorne is. So take all of that into account as we move out from the core of our Citadel into what lies beyond, because the Citadel is basically one enormous barracks filled with all of his soldiers. And most of those soldiers are, because we're in the Aether, demons. Pretty much all of them are demons of all kinds of stripes, and not just simply bloodletters or greater demons and the demons that we're aware of from the army list. Because even inside the Demons of Chaos army list, they've got other demons described, like ones who are working forges. And ones
the Demons of Chaos roster is a tiny fraction. Tiny
part. There's loads of demons here, many of which are truly enormous, some of which have never left the Citadel, some of which are beyond potent, but only in the Aether. And we have ourselves entire phalanxes of greater demons, those that sit by Khorne's side. Great bloodletters and great, good old hounds as well, all over the place. Some of which are named, some of which are truly, truly awful.
Yeah, and that's probably the last thing we'll visit before we move on from the Citadel itself is the kennels of that. Khorne really likes his dogs. He's a big dog dad as far as the Dark Gods go. Where one of the notable things is that in most of the Khorne's realm, you'll find a lot of the nightmarish creatures wandering about or being created. Like Juggernauts are a fascinating instance of they are simultaneously constructs, but also living entities. They're not robots, like they're full on part demon, part machine. So aspects of them are forged, which is a fascinating process that is mind bending to really consider about like the metaphysics of it, even from an etheric perspective. But the really interesting thing is that within the Brass Citadel itself, uniquely within the Brass Citadel, is the wandering realm of the Flesh Hounds, where the hounds patrol openly around the Skull Throne because they are Khorne's favored. They are his favorite pets. And some have risen into especially high esteem. There is the unnamed, but the Hound of Khorne that Arbal the Undefeated rides into battle, who is huge, even by Fleshhound standards. That dog is fucking gigantic, and is known to be one of Khorne's favorites, likely due to just its sheer goddamn size. The thing's more like a manticore-sized Fleshhound instead of the typical size. But then there's, of course, good old Karanak, who is very befitting to bring up, as he'll be coming to Total War in 2 days, which is really exciting. But Karanak is the named and current favorite of Khorne's hounds, who is always patrolling around his throne until Khorne gets so miffed at somebody that he sends Karanak to deal with them. Because Karanak very uniquely represents a unique concept for Khorne, which each of the characters kind of do. Karanak is the personification of vengeance. He's the Hound of Vengeance. And his goal is to track down Query. Usually it's people that have insulted Khorne in some fashion, either wizards who are grossly abusing their abilities, or people who talk shit about Khorne, or have in some way betrayed one of the tenets that he expects his followers to exist within. And Karanak hunts them down. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in a little bit, though we're going to focus more on the play, so we're not going to focus too much on Karanak. But one of the things that's really interesting about Karanak in this case is that where most demons, like Skulltaker, for instance, will go out, claim a skull, and come back, and that's it. Karanak brings everything back. Because if you've pissed off Khorne enough that he sends Karanak after you, there is nothing that will be allowed to be left of you in the mortal realms. He is going to bring all of you straight to Khorne's feet so that you get the god's personal attention. And he will take your skull, and then he gives everything else to Karanak to enjoy. And that includes your soul. Like, you don't get to just... Yeah, you just don't get to die and get away from the likes of Karanak. There is no escape. That's what makes him so fucking terrifying. Is that no matter where you go, how you flee, even death cannot be an escape. Though it's implied there are some people that have managed to escape him, which is wild, but they're few and far between.
I think there's also, since we're moving on to the hounds, it's worth discussing the metaphysical thinking behind this. Khorne is not the god of wolves. Khorne is not the god of wild animals. Khorne is a god of tamed dogs.
Yeah, and trained dogs.
This is a significant step in understanding who Khorne is. Khorne, for all, again, as I say, he is perceived as this wild, rabid, angry god, of which he is. He is a god, though, of dogs. Dogs that are trained, that hunt, that are controlled. And they may be ravening, wild, barking monstrosities that are hunting down blood and souls on behalf of their deity. But note, they are hunting down blood and souls on behalf of their deity. They're not doing it for sustenance, to supply their hunger, for survival, for their needs. That is the realm of wild creatures. They are not wild creatures. Each and every one of them is a tool with a purpose. And all of those purposes lead towards, ultimately, the blood god's ultimate aim, which is war in all of its manifestations and forms. He is a god of war. But note, the blood god is generally marked as a god of blood, because Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows. And whilst that term is frequently used in various places, it's also somewhat of a misnomer, because Khorne kind of does, because it needs to flow in his name. And that generally requires dogs, servants, those who are slaves to him in perpetuity, going forth in his name and making the blood flow. And that is often at the furthest vanguard of his forces, whether that might be in the material realm, where the true war that he is fighting is ongoing at all times in the immaterial realm. But the material realms are just further fronts on the greater war that Khorne is always waging. But the core that I'm bringing up here is, note that it is hounds, dogs. These are not wolves or animals that are wild. For all you might use wild as an adjective to describe them, they are not, strictly speaking, creatures out there in the wild. They are all, and this does sound almost contrary to what most people think for Khorne, they are all controlled. They are all leashed. Even the hounds themselves, every single last one, carries a collar of Khorne. They are all collared. They are all tamed. They are all trained. They are all have purpose. So the wild, rampaging view of Khorne is accurate, but is only a small part of a far, far, far bigger picture. Because Khorne ultimately is the ultimate leasher, the one who slaps out and leashes the followers to enact his will. So, yeah, that's worth having a look at as we move on to the hound side of things.
Yeah, I agree. And unless you have anything else to add for the Brass Citadel itself, I think we can kind of turn the page on that and get caught up with some super chat stuff and then start working our way outward.
Not really. The only thing I'll add from this section, because we're probably going to move on from Khorne himself, and it's worth noting that Khorne, in the later examples of him, is described in a way that reinforces other army lists in a way that most writers who are involved with it haven't realized, but does. So I think it's worth quickly alighting on this. And that's that Khorne's described as having 8 mighty rings. That's
the 8 rings. Yeah, the rings are
okay. One of which includes a big, huge skull rune. If you don't know the rune of Khorne, that big cross with the dash, 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 dash across the bottom is meant to look like a stylized skull. A big cross showing the 2 eyes to either side and the nose underneath, and then the lines underneath that, the teeth of the skull. It's quite simply a skull symbol. One of the rings shows that, but the other rings bear the symbols and heads of dead gods that Khorne has slain. And this is important to note. Now, some of these may be chaos gods, but they almost certainly aren't, because we know that the gods at the beginning of time went to war in various stories. And this is proof in the 8th edition army list that Khorne was part of this killing gods. And almost certainly, if you want the clearest examples of what to look for those, go check our Cain stream, where we were discussing Cain and the Great War of the Gods, the war in heavens that took place. Khorne was almost certainly a part of this. In fact, he was probably the instigator of it all. And he bears, to this day, the trophies of his successes on his hands.
Yeah,
and that
at least 7 gods. Skulls he's claimed for himself, which is wild.
It would not surprise me if Azurin himself sits there, or perhaps one of the rings is cracked, because Azurin, as we know, resurrects like a phoenix. And that would, I think, make a great deal. If I was going to be rewriting it, I almost certainly would add that one of the rings is broken and Khorne is fucking pissed.
Oh, that would be...
That's just beautiful.
Be really good. Yeah, like his armor's like burned under that ring and he like refuses to take it off.
His greatest success was bringing down the Divine Emperor in heaven. And what happens? The Divine Emperor in heaven goes, guess who's back the very next day? God damn it.
Watch as I hit you with the Uno reverse card, yeah?
Okay. Uno reverse card! God damn you! Love it. All right. Let's dive into our super chats.
Yep. Easy to remember where we left off because of the Obama is an agent. I would argue all politicians are agents of Tzeentch. It's within their nature. Hammond, what would happen if a god or gods believe that a person like Nagash is a god? Will that person be deified faster / stronger than deification by belief? That's a way super complicated question that is really hard to answer.
I can answer that super easily. Gods are not rational in the way that we are. They don't think things because they think things through in the way we do. They think in absolutes and certainties because they are the pinnacle of certain aspects of life and emotion. So when a god thinks that something else is a god, it is a god. So if this occurred and someone went, oh, Nagash is a god. If a person thinks that, it's just, hypothetical discussion. If a god says it,
I misread
because it's loosely speaking true.
Yeah, I misread the comment. Yes, I would 100% agree with Andy on that. And there are, I would say that this would lean really well into supporting the whole myth of Ulrich crowning Sigmar and, that deifying him and making him a member of the Pantheon, of the idea that he is acknowledged by the other gods of the Empire to being a god, which then maybe made him a god. That's one view you could take of it, and there is some stuff to explore there.
Yeah, there totally is. And there are so many different ways that those stories could be described. And it could be nothing more than Sigmar becoming a demon prince of Ulrich, for want of a better description. Because that's basically what demon princes are. They are mortals who are elevated to sit beside a god. And that's basically what Sigmar does. So there's lots of ways we can reinterpret and reimagine the stories that we already have, which means that when you're playing your own games, you can spin it any way you want for your game.
Yep. Just don't say that with near a witch hunter. Just don't.
Also, one last point that I do think is worth mentioning on the previous question, that is that gods frequently lie. There's a big difference between a god stating something that's true and a god lying. Tzeentch, for example, is basically everything it says is a lie, including perhaps that it's not the most powerful.
Yeah, gods are deceitful as fuck. They're an interesting bunch. So what would happen to a child born with an affinity to the ether in Society of Khorne Worshippers? So this is actually addressed in several different sources. Most of the time, they'll end up probably becoming something akin to a priest. Someone that is like a demon speaker, can have visions, is capable of summoning demons, understands the rites. They often will have really, really important roles to play within that Khornate culture. Just because you have an affinity with the ether does not mean you're going to be a wizard. Being a wizard or a witch often takes a form of training or embracing a certain lifestyle. It's pretty rare that you'll encounter an individual that's just like accidentally spitting out spells. There's often something that it acts as kind of a trigger event, but if you're in a culture that is actively, shall we say, drawing the attention of etheric entities, they are going to be those guides.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go another little metaphysical thing. Why does Khorne hate magic so much? What the fuck's going on here? Isn't Khorne a magical thing? Yes. But no, because magic is not aether. Aether is aether stuff that sits over there in the realm of chaos. In the material world, you can take etheric stuff and you can change the very nature of that material world by reshaping it into something new by using magic. Magic changes the material world into something new. Khorne does not do that. Khorne forges. Khorne does not cheat. Tzeentch cheats by basically breaking all the rules of forging and just spinning it into something else. By saying a few words, they take the changeable nature of the aether and they spin it into something materially different. It is 100% cheating. Now, bloodhounds, as they bounce into, fleshhounds, pardon me, as they bounce into the material realm, they are etheric entities made up of pure magic. They are, because they're etheric entities. So the first mistake is to think that Khorne doesn't associate with magic at all. He does all the time. He just doesn't use spells. He doesn't use crafting. Okay, so the first thing is these hounds are pure magic, and they will be using the winds of magic, the essence of the aether in the realm around them to navigate, to understand, because they themselves are etheric entities. They're effectively using magic all the time. They hunt and they pursue, they find the blood of other entities by the fact that they leave traceries that they understand as etheric entities. They're chasing magic. Khorne is not anti-magic per se. Khorne is anti-spells, using magic in the material realm to turn the material realm into something that it should never have been. You could argue that Khorne is a purist, and that Tzeentch is cheating and trying to create new stuff from nothing. He is change, after all. Khorne is not. So in this case, just because you're born with the ability to see the aether, that would be seen potentially as a massive blessing. You might be able to, for example, hunt like a fleshhound and be able to pursue down creatures because of the etheric energies that you can perceive. Seeing the etheric energies isn't bad. That's good. You're closer to Khorne. There's loads of really cool shit that you can have that comes from the aether that makes you a better Khorne worshipper. It doesn't make you a spellcaster. That's the big difference. Being able to interact with the Aether, being able to observe it, see it, use it, makes you potentially a very powerful priest or worshipper or perhaps servant of Khorne, but in no way does it make you ostracized. So as long as you're not casting spells and you're using what's there for within the rules of Khorne, you are 100% going to be elevated. So what would happen? They're almost certainly going to be elevated, assuming that they have the power to basically hold their own, because as we all know, you have to be pretty fucking hard to live in the realm of Khorne.
Yeah, and it's worth reiterating, especially that like Khorne uses magic in all sorts of ways, from the demons, which Andy talked about well, and it's like, the brass collars. A lot of people go, oh well, those give really strong magic resistance, but it's not really magic resistance. Total War actually hilariously gets it more accurate than the tabletop game does of its spell resistance. It's resistance to the changing that is cheating from Khorne's standard. It keeps things like anchored and following the rules, which you can also see with Khorne in the way that he does magic items, of like magical armor, magic weapons, enchanted items and stuff, of you're taking items and you're adding rules to them, but they still have a strict set of rules that they have to abide by. Same thing with all of his demons that manifest, of that, yeah, sure, they're magical entities, but once they're in the material world, they have a set of rules they have to obey. And so Khorne looks at that and goes, that's fair.
Yeah. There's some really lovely older stories that both come from 40k and Warhammer about how Khorne was often a god of honor as well. And this has kind of been lost in many of the later iterations, not all, but many, where he was a god that very much appreciated great warriors, no matter where they came from. And you would find that the leaders of the Khorne Berserkers or some equivalent, they would literally give nods and praises to those that could defeat them. And indeed, being defeated was, in many respects, the best way to praise Khorne. Because if you could defeat them, then you yourself were a great warrior, doing everything that Khorne was looking for. So, yeah, Khorne is more the god of not cheating the material realm's rules, which I think is super fascinating. Because then you start wondering, what the fuck is going down with his desperate desire to destroy the material realm? What is it that really sticks in his craw? What is it that makes Khorne so fucking angry? And that, I think, is a question that Games Workshop has never really spent any time, any at all, having a think about. What they've thought about is what Khorne is. They haven't thought, why is Khorne? And that's a super fun one. And yeah, we might go big Guardians.
Going, no one asked how is Khorne. Everyone just asked. No one asked why I'm angry. That's why I'm angry.
That's why I'm angry.
Ryan Woodell, side question: how much do I have to pay for you both to do a what if or fan fiction of what the gods did during the Cataclysm? You must tell me. We will consult.
I'm already kind of doing it.
That's yes. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe keep a look on this week's poll. That could actually maybe be a fun.
Yeah. So I'll give an answer on that one almost directly, Ryan. I'm kind of doing that for my game over in Lorehammer. And the start of seeing some of that will be popping up as a post for, I'm sorry to say, our all access patrons, because we're building up the story of what happened during the War of the Gods with the elves.
He's also technically lying. He's already started revealing it. Just literally go watch the episodes, and you're going to see some stuff about Slash, and you'll go, "What?" Like he's already started doing it.
Indeed. So then you could argue that the story of what we're messing around with in Lorehammer is the story of what happened with the Warhammer world, and it's slowly but surely getting unveiled. And the reason that is because the Enemy Within campaign is all about setting up the end of the world. And you can't set up the end of the world if you don't know why everyone wants to end the world. So why, the question of Khorne that we had just a moment ago, why is at the very heart of what our campaign's doing. So I am going to be doing this slowly but surely. But on top of that, Sotek and I are also going to be discussing it out in a variety of different ways over the course of the upcoming months.
Yeah, just months, sure. Dynamite, Carpenter Skulls makes you think of Khorne's realm like a sort of Terminator movie when the robot tank drives over a pile of skulls. Yeah, exactly. Like it would. Yeah, his realm. Many parts of it are just littered with bones. Because that's what he does. That is his thing. So you are very correct.
Man, yes.
Mornington Crescent. I like the visual of skulls bubbling up and then flowing downhill for river skulls. Yeah, Khorne's throne. It's incalculable the amount of bones that are surrounding it, and it's much more realistic. Of the idea is that instead of him being like so high up there you can't see him anymore, it's much more realistic that skulls are constantly like being so like popping up underneath and then flowing outwards eternally, and then like into his practically infinite space of a throne room.
Yeah, you've got to realize that this is an etheric place. This is not a material place. So the normal rules of tall, width, whatever don't really apply. The ups and the downs of it, pardon me, I just hiccuped at the same time as I was talking. The ups and the downs of it don't make sense with material senses. So if you were to arrive there and see it within the paradigm of your own material senses, yeah, sure, it'd be a big, huge throne with all these skulls eternally bubbling up and spilling down the great waterfall. But it's never going to change. And there's always going to be more and more and more. But it doesn't mean that he gets higher and higher and higher and higher. That's the material way of doing it. His realm gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as the skulls and his bones spread out further and further from the central citadel where he lies.
Yep. Men rely on Yak. I like that. That's a fun name. Always thought more could have been made of Khorne's positive aspects. In martial honor, bravery, and the rush of adrenaline allows you to overcome the odds. A joy listening to you, my dudes. Yeah, that is definitely something that it was very heavily explored in older stuff. It kind of fell a bit to the wayside. One of the issues, so to speak, and it's not like a big issue, it's just like a issue that Chaos runs into in later editions of Warhammer especially, is that they tend to get more and more focused on with just a bad guy brush. So just focusing on like the super extremes and the evilness of it. Whereas you need to understand that the whole aspect of the Dark Gods and the reason they have so many followers and they're so powerful is because they're all seductive in various ways. There are good things about them under certain contexts. Like there are some interesting pieces that have been done by various writers of that, and you see a lot of this in the roleplay game. The roleplay game tackles this from a lot of angles, where a lot of the chaos cults, many of them start from positive sources, where you have like a really good concept in a group that's been coming up a lot with the upcoming Khorne DLCs. A lot of people want to see the Brass Sisters, which the Brass Sisters are a chaos cult that got tossed up following the Storm of Chaos and get mentioned in the Tome of Corruption. And the whole concept behind them is that basically you have a group of women who are widows who have lost their husbands and their children and their loved ones in war. And they initially band together to fight back against the little off leavings of Archaon's horde that are still scattered around Midland, and go to take the fight to them to get revenge for the people they love that have fallen and to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. But over the course of months, some of them start to play with the idea, or twist the idea, not twist, but start to think that, if the Empire had done more, if the other provinces had answered the call, if everyone else had showed up to help, maybe not so many people shouldn't have died. And look at all these fat cats that are making all this money, taking advantage of all of us who are suffering. We should go after these guys too. And they just very slowly, very subtly start to twist more and more until they become very bloodthirsty and very dangerous to literally everybody.
And I think that's the core component of it. So I'm going to slightly disagree with you here, because I don't mean disagree with Sotek, I mean disagree with the comment, where I don't think necessarily focusing on the positive aspects makes any real sense, because these are the Chaos Gods. They don't have positive aspects anymore. They are completely corroded. They are gods of absolute awfulness. The positive aspects that you might view that they could have are all there to be twisted into what they want.
Yeah, that's true.
Become a complete slave to darkness, if you want to go with the older and often newer terminology. You will be lost to chaos. You will become nothing more than almost a puppet, an extension of its will, and its will in the material plane is often nothing more than a manifestation of its core emotional output. With Khorne, it's rage. You lose anything that you once were. But these traits, the martial honor, the bravery, the rush of adrenaline, these are all the points where it starts. And that's the point where you effectively take your first sip of the drug that will eventually take you tumbling over the edge into hardcore drug addiction. Khorne will use those aspects to pull you in and then push you over the edge as you've lost and effectively become a demon. There's a massive difference between the positive natures of humanity and the other species, which are represented by completely different gods. Martial honor, bravery, the Russian. This is Myrmidia. This is Myrmidia. And not mixing up Myrmidia and Khorne is absolutely essential. But Khorne worshippers draw from Myrmidians and completely corrupt them and turn them into horror shows. And that is what the Chaos Gods are doing.
I think the really important thing to keep in mind, because this is a subject that's often brought up a lot, especially because like the 40K version of the Dark Gods tends to play around a lot more with, oh no, they do have positive aspects. Whereas in fantasy, I think the important thing to keep in mind as far as why this isn't true and why this is a very tempting lie being fed to you by like a cultist is that Khorne doesn't care about martial honor, bravery, or the rush of adrenaline. He doesn't care. He doesn't care at all about how you feel about how you're spilling blood in his name, how you're doing it. None of that matters to him. It matters to you.
Yeah.
All he cares about is that you're killing and you're spreading blood and that you feel rage. If anything, he's going to take all of these things from you in the long run and replace them with just more hate and more rage. It's a sinister trap, which is a really fun way to explore them. Of that, you would have the Chaos Cultist being a sinister figure who goes, yeah, you know that feeling you get when you're fighting and you're like fighting for what's right and all that stuff. Don't you think we should lean more into that? Shouldn't we invest more into that? We should make a fight club so we can indulge in that adrenaline rush, right? Like, let's get together and have a little fight club. And you don't realize that they're setting you down a path that's not going to end good for you.
Yeah, exactly that. I think the core parts of all of the Chaos Gods that you have to remember is that they ultimately are corruption, and corruption of all that is positive. They're no matter how various Chaos worshippers, and indeed some players who play Chaos, will try to say, no, actually, my god's a cool god because he's all about martial honor, about bravery. Khorne is great. No, absolutely not. That is not Khorne. That is where Khorne will be drawing perhaps many of its worshippers from, because they're the easiest to corrupt for Khorne. But that in no way is what Khorne is. Khorne is that bellowing monster that turns all of his, let's call them worshippers for a nice term, all of his worshippers into extensions of its will. It doesn't care about martial honor or bravery, the rush of adrenaline, or anything else. It cares about ultimately Khorne.
Yeah. Great super chat though. I think that was excellent. Thank you very much. Silver Skink, does the throne actually rise? The skulls are at yeah. So yes, I do think it is the best skull slip and slide to be found in the universe. I do think it undeniably is that. However, we kind of already discussed about the metaphysics of how his throne probably actually works. Thank you, Silver Skate. Jonathan Scott, welcome to the Realm of Chaos Tours, your one-stop shop for otherworldly sightseeing. Before we begin, you'll need to sign this shard liability waiver. just don't read the fine print. Don't worry about it. Dino Man, potentially controversial opinion. I think Valkia being the consort of Khorne feels a bit unnecessary. It feels kind of odd that they had to make a female character show her dedication to the God of Blood and Rage as a love interest. So it's interesting enough without that. It feels kind of weird that Khorne would be too in love with a mortal. So the thing about Valkia that's very interesting is that Khorne, I would say that Khorne's love for Valkia is probably not what you're thinking of when you think of the term Khorne loves Valkia. And this, how do I say this? I think the idea of Khorne taking Valkia on as a consort, I think a lot of people take that terminology and go, oh, Khorne wants to bang Valkia. He wants to like summon her to his throne room and they can like do the nasty and throw down on the skull throne. I don't think that's what is actually being said with their relationship as much as I think that it's Khorne finds in Valkia what he considers for whatever reasons, which makes for a fun exploration, the perfect mortal servant.
Yeah.
Someone who
fucking rocks.
Yeah, someone who he believes that he watched her life and he said she is perfect. And to the point that she became one of his most dedicated followers. Despite being a mortal champion, she killed a demon prince in a one-on-one fight that lasted for days, which is insane, and tried to take that demon prince's skull to Khorne's throne and died on the path. And Khorne got so angry at this injustice, at this violation of a journey that he wanted to see come to fruition, that he quite literally shattered an aspect of reality with his rage and brought her back to life. But her body was so broken that he remade her in an image more befitting to him. But think about it. He didn't make her sexy, right? He didn't make her into like a big booby, barely wearing any armor stuff. He made her into like this kind of horrifying looking pseudo bloodletter creature that is just kitted out in weapons and armor and designed for war. Like, she's a war goddess, but not like the sexy kind. I know people on Twitter are like, no, she's sexy. But like, from an objective standpoint, if you actually look at her body, she's pretty freaky looking.
Everyone's going to find something sexy in anything that is of the gender that they apparently like on a particular day.
Yep.
So there's always going to be some folks who find her sexy regardless. I broadly agree with all of that. Valkia is a representation of perfection. And that is why she is exalted to his side. It doesn't necessarily mean the same things that we would on the material side associate with that. This is an etheric bond. This is an etheric joining of the god of war with the god of war's perfect servant. And in many respects, she is the ultimate expression of what it is to follow down the roads of chaos, where one is attempting to impress one of the chaos gods. She's hit peak. There's only one thing that she could do arguably further, and that's become entirely etheric. But to do so would be to lessen her perfection, because she's the perfect follower, and that requires her to be material, particularly from Khorne's perspective. A god that is clearly obsessed with the material, a god that is obsessed with material rules and material goals and the blood and the life that lies in the material plane. Khorne is quite unlike the other three Chaos gods in terms of how it expresses itself and what's important at the very core of its essence, of its worship. And it requires the material realms for it to be fully expressed. That being the case, Valkia would become less perfect if exalted, and if ascended. And I think that's a fascinating part of her story. I think that the best way to describe this, though, is if you want to know more, vote for a Valkia stream, because I think she'd be fucking amazing.
Yeah, we would love to do a Valkia stream.
I love Valkia. She's a really good character. So I understand she gets a lot of hatred from some, and she also gets a lot of love from others. From my perspective, I think that she has added something fascinating to what is the pillar of almost ridiculous distance that the Chaos Gods are placed upon, and has in some respects brought the Chaos Gods down to the same level of the other gods. And Valkia is a classic example of why Warhammer background for the Chaos Gods, I would argue, is much broader and much more depth-filled than what you'll find in, say, 40k, where they have become beyond anything else in the setting. They are actually even beyond themselves. They're almost a parody of what they initially were when the Chaos Gods were ported over to Warhammer 40k from Warhammer in the first place. So, yeah, I think that'd be a good stream.
It's got a word. Imagining Khorne leaning over a table of maps and paperwork, managing logistics is not something most people probably consider. He
doesn't need to.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Khorne is that whenever you're playing Total War, keep in mind that you're essentially Khorne, with all the rage that comes with it. But one of the things that Khorne has done multiple times throughout the lore is that watching battles take place in the mortal plane, something will happen. Oftentimes it will be a wizard goofing with some shit that will make Khorne so angry that he reaches down and he picks up a skull and he hurls it through the ether at that battlefield. And so this meteor skull will come flying out from like a storm of magic or whatever and impact the battlefield and just blow up and kill a bunch of people. Of that, he's watching always. Like he doesn't need, like Andy said, he doesn't need those tables and logistics because his perception is everywhere. In a lot where there is blood, Khorne is watching.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to imagine it. Imagine because one of the things that we do when we try to imagine what these gods or entities would be like is to contextualize it within a real world context. But it's not. It's a god in the aether. In truth be spoken, it's not even sitting on that throne, really. That's just one part of the greater whole. The entire realm of Khorne is Khorne. All the greater demons are Khorne. All the lesser demons are Khorne. It's a really big, complicated affair. But that entity that sits at the very heart of it, Khorne itself, it is the maps and the paperwork and the logistics. It is all of those battlefields going on out there that it's watching. It's all going on within it. It doesn't sit there looking over charts going, because it doesn't need to. It can see it literally real time at all times. I think Sotek makes a perfect example of, in some respects, Khorne is like you playing the game of Total War, sitting there looking out from the outside and going, fuck you for taking over. How dare you invade there? Fucking hell. I had an alliance with you. God damn it. Yeah, you've just found that inner Khorne. But you're at any point, because time doesn't move in the game. It only moves when you allow it to move as you move to your next turn and do your next thing. You're basically Khorne looking at all the battlefields that are available to you at any one time. And you're just sitting on your throne of skulls or game chair.
Yeah, we all know the skull throne is literally just a gamer chair. Comparison. So Khorne appears as a giant of a being while Valky is of near human size, so he's sort of just buzz around him like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. Well, so it's worth noting that if you were in the realm of chaos because you're having a bad time, and you were to encounter one of the gods, what they would look like is really subjective, heavily subjective, and it has to do with them and with you. It's really messy. Like Andy talked about, the lore is pretty straightforward about that. Khorne is like a big hound-headed thing in a big suit of armor. So you'd probably perceive him to be something like that, but how big he would be would depend. Like when Valkia encounters him, he could be larger than life, in which case he's this huge colossus, or maybe he appears almost more akin to an equal, in which case maybe he's more human-sized.
I think their absolute adoration and love for him almost certainly would make him that enormous creature. Yeah. She bows down before him. That makes sense of her worship, of her adulation. So for all this is a funny aside, yes, I in no way think that it isn't the case. Because we're not sitting here, as was described by Sotek already, describing someone who's getting banged up against the skull throne every other weekend. That's not what's happening here. She would not diminish herself in such a thing. There's battlefields to be off a battling with. There are greater things to do. Everyone doesn't need to be so focused on sex. Relationships are complicated.
Yeah, especially when you're
I just want to bring up on one comment because it actually made me laugh because I think it's accurate. Because just imagine how angry you get if you couldn't rage quit. Just imagine how much you've got to go. If you've got it, you can't just go reload. You just can't. You've got to live with this shit again and again and again. Yeah, pretty much. Khorne has no outlet for him.
Yeah, Khorne. Imagine playing the most rage-inducing game possible, and that's just your existence for eternity.
Yep.
There's no way out. You can't even die. You just have to sit there and do it. Fire Snake. Khorne is not very creative when it comes to names. That does not seem to be one of his strong suits. That is very true.
It's fair to say none of the Chaos Gods really are, let's be honest.
Yeah, chaos in general is pretty blunt. They need more, they definitely need more poets in their society.
But I think to a degree it makes sense though, because you've got to realize that the entities that we're dealing with, etheric entities, are entities of pure single direction purpose. And those pure single direction purpose-led namings make sense. They will be looking to basically express themselves in the only way they care. And that's always going to be blood, 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 fighty war, carve, maim, carnage, blood, blood, carnage, more, carnage, maim. And that's pretty much it. Probably without the song, because the song can be left to Slaanesh and Slaanesh's crazy artistic ways. So I don't think that this in any way reflects poorly on the setting. In some respects, it reinforces it.
Khorne's a lover, not a fighter. He's always blessing. Andy, I feel Khorne and Hachette share many similarities in forging weapons. In Total War, the Machina Demonium event says the forges of the Demonium are powered by Hachette's breath, a fire hotter than stars, suggesting their realms are close. There is undeniably some really fascinating overlaps between Khorne and Hachette. The two of them share some interesting parallels of that. They both are very heavily associated with like heat. They're both very heavily associated with smithing and with demonic, metallic, robotic type entities. There is an interesting relationship there. If you go watch our stream on Zarnagrand, you may find some ideas in there that would heavily suggest that there may be a good reason the two of them are so closely related.
Yeah, there is a great deal of misunderstanding when it comes to Chaos gods, realms, overlaps in general. There is both a lot of apparent material overlap, while simultaneously the gods are literally nothing like each other. Khorne is not a forge god. Khorne forges. Oh, and let's give you a clean example so you can say, oh, I see what you mean. Slaanesh is not a war god, but Slaanesh goes to war all the fucking time. Like, all the time. Pretty much. All the fucking time. But we don't just sit there going, well, Slaanesh is really a god of war, isn't it? It's a god of war because it's doing war. No, it's not a god of war. And Khorne is not a god of forging. Khorne is a blood of warfare and bloodshed and rage sitting at the heart of it. Hachette is not a god of rage. Hachette is a god of forging, very much. And yes, there are many what appear to be surface detail similarities. I would argue that the deep treachery that lies at the very heart of everything that is Hachette, the awfulness that lies at the heart of everything that is Hachette, much of which we covered in the Zarnagarun stream, will lead you down a very different direction to what Khorne is. And I would argue that if a writer made them look like they were the same, that the writer had failed, because they have clearly been described in very, very different ways.
Yeah, and when you're dealing with, so there are a number of places in Khorne's realm to highlight the confusion that comes from this, which is totally understandable. So so this is a place that is within the sphere of Khorne's realm's influence, but it's near the edges of the realm of his influence. Now, this event could be implying that Hachette may have some power here. Maybe this is a ground where Hachette and Khorne have made some sort of mutual alliance, or there's some sort of thing going on between the two of them there. There are stories that could be explored there, but you shouldn't be confused in the sense that the two are like particularly close, or that like there's more of a relation than maybe would just be on the surface. That this could just be a place where there is some kind of alliance between the two, or a mutual interest, or something that was stolen from Hachette or taken from Hachette in battle. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information on it. Like, just looking at the map of Khorne's realm, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forges that are all outside on the fringes of his realm and are a massive. And the Machina Demonium is only one of them, being like literally a giant mechanical complex floating on like a weird little island in the sky. And what is it?
It's the thing.
One of the things that is good and bad about Warhammer that we've talked a lot about on Lorebeards, especially earlier episodes, is that Games Workshop has always lived with a door open policy, of the sense that whenever they write lore, they'll kind of just throw a lot of shit at the wall. And that is, to be frank, kind of random. And if it generates enough interest, or they think there's a story that could be explored there, they'll then turn their attention to it and explore it. In this case, like the Machina Demonium doesn't have any mentions about having anything to do with Hachette in its original inception on the map, but someone in Total War sat there and went, you know what? It's a really big, cool forge thing. It's right on the edge of Khorne's realm. What if we were to say something like Hachette has some kind of involvement with it? That can imply an interesting story there. And so they did it. And now we have that. And now we go, oh, I wonder what that's about. That's just kind of how it goes.
I think a really nice parallel here as well, if you're looking at the overall lore, is the strong connections between the Hornwrath and Nurgle. And some writers have basically said, Hornrat is just Nurgle. And other writers have gone, what the fuck? That makes literally no sense. Read what the Hornrat is with all of the treachery involved there, and read what Nurgle is. And they're very, very different deities. Just because we have got some aspects of, let's say, disease being shared by parts of them, in no way means that they're the same thing. Now, some writers have come along and gone, I'm going to make them the same because I think they should be. And then you get Age of Sigmar, which goes, no, actually, now there's just 5 Chaos Gods. So, screw you guys. They never were the same, and never will they be again. And you got to remember that for all someone like myself loves to gently rubbish Age of Sigmar every once in a while purely because it's not my Warhammer, which is fine. Everyone's got their own preferences. That doesn't in any way impact how Games Workshop handles it, where the second they declare that's 5 Chaos Powers, that means it always has been. That means back in Warhammer, the Hornrat never was anything like Nurgle, and just isn't, because they are discrete. And no one can write again from that point forward that the two of them are linked, because they're not. They can have shared space, they can argue over each other, they can have links, they can do all sorts of stuff, but they are coming from two different sides, not the same side. They're not inhabiting the same space. They are different entities. And that is pretty much the case with Hashat at the moment. But as we have noted back in our Zarnagarun stream, we gave one example of a reading for how that entity could be resolved and still answer all of the questions with a good, unique, and interesting, let's say, result. Where that could be something different. And Games Workshop at some point might sit down with their Chaos Dwarves and go, well, actually, Hashat is this.
I'm going to skip ahead because Godzilla, thank you for the generous super chat. Actually, just put this. This is a quote from Scarbrand from Total War Warhammer 3. Scarbrand says, Hashat's hatred cannot defeat Khorne's rage. Maybe suggesting Hashat doesn't use rage, probably because he's far more calculating and strategic, and he focuses on hatred, but not rage.
I would argue his followers are more calculating and strategic, not necessarily Hashat. But remember, the god is not necessarily the same as its followers. Khorne is a perfect example of this.
Yeah.
Khorne,
to be fair, that's a quote from Scarbrand. So Scarbrand's interpretation of events, so to speak.
I do think it's a great comment, though, because Hashat and Khorne do not tackle things in the same way. Then neither do different humans.
Also, if you want a really good deep dive into talking about like how gods have similar spheres but they're very different, go check out our Lord Scroll stream. We delved really heavy into like Nurgle versus the Horned Rat there, and also talked about how like they can have those parallels while still being very different. And you'll find some really cool stuff there. Anyway, Khorne Shiba, how good is Karanak, though? Is he only after no-name characters? Is he going after Mazamundi or Nagash, where they make him into a puppy? So there is the classic thing of GW likes to introduce characters that in their own individual lore blurbs, it talks about how they're the greatest thing that's ever lived and they're unstoppable and mighty demigods. And you look at that and go, well, how come they never killed anyone that I know?
Why is that so crap?
Yeah, and it kind of leans into a situation of you have these army books that you have to remember that the Warhammer world is not written by a singular author who's trying to keep everything in balance. It's written by a hilarious collection of goofballs that has been interchanged over many years, whose goal is to gas up their plastic toys so that you will buy them. Yeah. Which causes a lot of oops when it comes to like, and that's why like power scaling in Warhammer is really fucking hard. And just kind of an effort and futility it's fun, but it's ultimately pointless because the lore isn't designed for that. And this is a really good example of that, of like, if you read Karanak's lore, you'd look at it and go, okay, so Karanak can like kill anybody. Why hasn't he hunted down Nagash? Why hasn't he hunted down Mazdamundi? And the obvious answer to that is because the plot says he can't. Otherwise, those characters would need to beat him, in which case he's not as good as this says he is, or we'd have these important characters being dead. And that happens a lot,
So there is a way you can justify this if you're ever writing it, and that is basically Karanarak has killed all the ones that haven't survived, so they would be no-name characters because they're fucking dead. So Karanarak is 100% successful because he has been, and the reason that you don't know the other ones is because he's killed them.
I will say,
That sort of works, but it's weak ass.
Yeah. If you want, though, some notes about things that Karanarak has done, because you're like, I want to be excited about this big dog. Tell me something cool he did. I'll give you 2 really cool examples. The first is that he plays a really heavy role in the Cataclysm, where Kairos Fateweaver manages to start. The Slann were basically, when they retreated to Lustria and they put up their big bubbles, the demons couldn't get through it. And the demons were like, well, damn, those are some really impressive force fields. And Kairos Fateweaver went, I've got an idea. I'm just going to open a little pocket, just a really, really teeny tiny pocket dimension inside the force field right next to all the Slann. And he does that, and Karanarak pops out at the head of a group of Fleshhounds, and they destroy the Slann, despite the Slann going, oh shit, and seeing them with, there's just not enough time. And them and their guards get absolutely obliterated. And it leads to the fall of like 3 or 4 different temple cities before the Lizardmen finally figure out what's going on and make countermeasures. And the other very hilarious story, I love this story because it's super funny. And if you're ever playing a Wolfric campaign, you have a gold wizard, you can actually have fun playing with this, is that there was a really bad incident where a fucking dumbass, I cannot express how stupid this fucker was. There was a gold wizard in the gold college who was a particularly ambitious, greedy dickhead. And he wanted to kill some rivals within the gold college so that he could attain a higher rank. And so he performs a demonic summoning ritual, and he summons Karanarak into the gold college. And of course, this being like, Karanarak is like one of the best anti-wizards in the universe. So when he spawns in the gold college, of course, that gold wizard immediately loses control of him through his demon ritual and gets 8. Karnak kills him. And then he's in a college of magic, which has so much magic that Karnak can easily sustain his form. And he goes on a murder spree throughout the gold college and kills dozens of individuals. Andy is stepping out for just a minute, so I will maintain the fort while he's doing something real quick. But yeah, it is like an absolute massacre. And hilarious, to put it very bluntly, that one guy's ambition almost got his entire college killed. You can actually joke, very accurately, I might add, that from the standpoint of Total War Warhammer, the reason we got the gold wizards so late in Total War Warhammer, they were the last of the wizards to join us, was because they were still recovering from Karnak absolutely devouring and murdering all of them. And now I am going to okay. Okay, cool. So Andy will be right back. I expected him to message me on Discord. He messaged me on something else. And taken by the fisherman. Diabolical fisherman. So, okay, we're going to turn this very briefly into a private... oh, no, he's back already. That was quick. But speaking of Karnak, is just a reminder that he will be coming out in 2 days for Total War Warhammer, which is super duper exciting. Welcome back. And that is super good. So just remember, if you need to blame why it took us so long to get gold wizards in Total War Warhammer, or how Balthazar got in charge of the college so quickly, just keep in mind that one dumbass got about half the college murdered by a demon dog.
Yeah, Karnak got me. Sorry. But fortunately, I fought him off because his stats weren't that good. I would argue that's one of the biggest issues with, as was described by Sotek, with Warhammer in general, is that they create an unmovable force, and then they create another unmovable force, then they create another one, and then they claim that all of them never lose. And then you're left going, but not only does that make little sense, but when you look at their stats, clearly this one's better. Clearly.
Yeah, Golrach, the most powerful of all the dragons that we know of, and he's only all 6s. Oh, all right.
Yeah. What the hell's up with this stats?
Watch me got him with a cannon.
Yeah, Karnak is literally fine in terms of his stats. He hasn't got a high leadership. His attacks aren't that good. His weapon skill is only 7, which in the Greater Khorne scheme or Elf scheme isn't that high. Yeah, he's better than most humans, but hey, there's a lot of things in the Warhammer world that eat him for breakfast. So yeah, be aware that when we're looking at stats, and also when we're looking at the lore, not only do they not always match up, but the lore often uses extreme hyperbole. So yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's really fun when we get the very rare instance where like a Black Library author or just one of the writers of the army books will actually allow 2 special characters to fight each other. Those are really, really fun because then we get to see them actually go, okay, how do I make this work without making either character look like super shit? And really fun things happen. Mornington Crescent, his aquatic demons wouldn't be flesh sharks, but flesh dolphins. Smart, trained, and utterly ruthless. I don't know, man. If you do research about dolphins, they're kind of dolphins are kind of Slaneshi, so to speak. I'll just leave it at that. Dolphins are messed up. They're wonderful. Yeah, they're wonderful creatures, but they're also raging douchebags. Dinoman, Khorne would appreciate Shakespeare's Mark Antony. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. I would say it is very likely that whoever created Khorne had that in part of their brain. That would not surprise me at all if they were like, oh yeah, that's why we use dogs, because of that quote. Evans, does Khorne have a particular favorite version of warfare, and what would his opinion be on greenskins, considering their society is centered around warfare and combat in a certain sense?
See, I love this because this speaks to one of the things that a lot of people don't quite grasp with Khorne. The greenskins are antithetical to Khorne in so many ways, and greenskins don't fall to Khorne for a variety of different reasons. And a lot of that is not only not explained, it is left with such an open door that anyone that looks at it goes, but wait a minute, surely greenskins are just Khorne worshippers in the making. And the answer is no, they're not. And why? And it goes back to what we discussed earlier, the difference between a wolf and a dog. Khorne's servants are dogs. Orcs are wolves. And orcs and greenskins in general are wild. They are quite beyond Khorne's province. Dogs, the tamed creatures, those which can be brought under leash, that is Khorne's province. And that is where Khorne lies. The greenskins and Khorne are, again, one of those unmovable things hitting that hard rock. Smash! They are not the same. They are not alike. And in terms of the etheric entity that is Gork and Mork, or Gorka Morka, if you want to go all Age of Sigmar on it. Thanks 40k for that one. If you're drawing on that particular aspect, they are very different entities. So in this case, does Khorne have a particular favorite version of warfare? Yes, where Khorne wins and the blood flows and Khorne's worshippers do what Khorne worshippers say and they win, because who wants to play Warhammer Total War and lose? You'd rage quit. And what would their opinion be of greenskins? The greenskins are beyond its control.
Yeah, there's actually kind of an interesting thing also of that when you really get down to the brass tacks. That one was unintentional. That's Andy's fault. He put it in my brain earlier. That when you really look at how they wage violence and why they wage violence, the greenskins and Khorne are very different spheres. Of that, for greenskins, they kind of have this rather horrifying yet amusing thing of that violence is fun. That violence speaks to them on a very primal, almost elemental level, and that they're this force of nature that sweeps out and fights for the thrill and for the enjoyment of it. Almost like kind of that adrenaline rush comment we talked about earlier. Whereas for Khorne, it's about the shedding of blood, and that is it. It's not about how good the fight is. It's not about
serious business.
Yeah, it's a serious matter. There's no fun.
Khorne is the edgelord of it all, and do you not realize you can't take it's just no. You got to do it right.
Because there's an interesting thing in Warhammer. We have some really cool stories about like little lore snippets and stuff about how like there have been orc war bosses that have like defeated a garrison of a town, and they smash the gates down. They look in, they see all these humans cowering and children crying and stuff, and everyone's clearly just broken. And the war boss goes, there's no fight in these gits. Let's get the fuck out of here. And they just run off because there's no more fun. It's not time to fight anymore. Whereas for Khorne worshippers, They would massacre those people.
I think it's important that we draw a slight distinction here because fun is very much how they're often portrayed. But I think fun is not necessarily the best word to use. Because if we're trying to look at it just purely on the existential, etheric nature of it all, orcs are creatures of instinct. Orcs are much like animals in that they respond to their instincts. And what would be rational is not often the route that the orcs take because their drives don't push them in that direction. Where Khorne worshippers are far beyond basic drives. They're tamed. They work according to a specific pattern, where the orcs are instinctual. It's just built into them. So there's quite a difference. What wild versus tame, basically. And the wild animal, I mean, wild animals, just take a look at a bear. A bear just doesn't wantonly kill everything when it breaks into the room. The bear's in there for its food or whatever it thinks is causing danger, whatever. It'll prowl around. It might sit in a swing and move backwards and forwards. It's a fucking bear. You don't think of a bear and go, oh shit, it's an edgelord that's going to try and take me down with its fucking obsession with blood and murder and slaughter. No, they're animals. And orcs, in some respects, for all they have intellect, are more of an expression of wild creatures than they are an expression of absolute obsession with one way of life, which is basically what the Chaos Gods are. They are all dialed up to 11, obsession in one particular area, massively obsessed with something, where the orcs are much freer than that.
Yeah. That being said, there is something to be said of that. There are many Khorne worshippers, not Khorne himself necessarily, but worshippers who do deeply enjoy greenskins and will angle their warhordes to go attack greenskin Waz because they know the greenskins are just going to fight them. And they're like, all right, let's go have a punch up. So there is that to say. But like Khorne himself, I agree with Andy.
There's also some lovely stories with the greenskins literally pissing themselves because of Khorne and the chaos in general, purely because chaos is wrong and they feel it in their gut because they're almost more natural, for want of a better description, than the quite unnatural chaos that they are confronting. And they just feel wrong.
The greenskins don't like supernatural things. They really don't.
They're often hiking out of there, fleeing. Nope.
Yeah. But yeah, there's some really fun stories in there. And but yeah, I would agree very much with Andy that most of the time, whenever you see Khorne itself portrayed dealing with like in situations where like you're getting an idea of like how the god would feel towards greenskins, it's not very positive. Whereas like, you know, in 40K, it's more what you would expect, where you have the whole thing of there's that orc champion that Khorne like resurrects to fight every day because Khorne thinks he's so cool because he fights. Fantasy Khorne is not like that. Magladra. So if Khorne sends Karanak after those who mocked him, why didn't he send it after Nagash when he stole Krell? And if he did, how did Nagash get away? That's a great question and could be an interesting story to explore. Was Khorne necessarily super upset that Nagash brought Krell back? That might not be something that upsets Khorne as much as everyone thinks it does.
Because did he bring Krell back or did he bring his bones back? There's a whole variety of different things. Gods view things in a different way to the material people who are telling the stories. So Nagash might think he was upset. The worshippers there might think he's upset, where Khorne literally didn't give a fuck.
Yeah, the Krell is another character that I'd really love to do a stream on because he is a whole Khorne. You know, as much as like Khorne, I would love to see more interesting units and stuff. He does have some really fucking cool characters walking around.
Yeah, agreed.
Mr. Pig, could it be that he views the material realm as unsalvageable from the sorcery sciences of the old ones?
Yes, that would be one way of viewing it. I definitely think that potentially be the case. You've got to realize that when the old ones came, they changed the world and they moved the world into a position of realms of gods and magic and sorcery science, where beforehand it had been a far more material realm where apparently magic of some form definitely existed. The dragons themselves represent aspects of that, but what it was beforehand was clearly different. And if you go with the most recent lore, not only different, didn't have the colors of magic in the way that we understand it today. So yeah, I think that would definitely be one reading.
Yep, Khorne is the god of 1v1, no items, fight me, thereby making the Brass Citadel final destination from Super Smash Brothers. Yeah, Khorne would absolutely be the no items, that's cheating. Whereas Tzeentch is all items on maximum spawn rate. Phil, how does Khorne feel about blunt weapons when they risk damaging those precious skulls? I think that would kind of tie into me and Andy's discussion earlier about like the fact that most of the skulls that Khorne gets are probably not truly physical. They're more representation, so to speak. That being said, there are characters that exist within the Warhammer world who believe that Khorne wants pristine skulls. And so they're really like about that if a skull is damaged in a way that it's no good and you can't offer that up to Khorne. I don't remember what book it is, but I know there's a character that exists who his whole obsession is that when he wants to offer a skull to Khorne, it has to be perfect. So like it can't take any severe damage, and he has to decapitate them in a really specific way, and he's like obsessed with doing it when they're alive. But it's a particular quirk of individuals or cults, not the god himself.
I agree completely. Focusing on just purely the material is in many respects not wise, because it's an etheric entity in an etheric realm, and whatever arrives there isn't material. So literally every skull inside the true skull throne isn't an actual skull. It's a component of the soul. So it is drawn from the skull. It's not the actual skull. So yeah, I don't think Khorne himself would have literally any problems with blunt weapons at all, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be pushing forward on, for example, blades, because you can behead with blades. Khorne himself is represented as being a god that is obsessed with fighting with just one weapon, just this mighty magical sword of bogginess. And a part of that is because Khorne himself is represented as a deity that is obsessed with head taking. And that is a weapon that clearly can do such a thing. But nevertheless, I don't think he'd have a problem, but I think many of his worshippers would.
Yeah. Hey man, why doesn't the Odsark Bone Reapers invade Khorne's realm? There's loads of bone everywhere. You joke, but they literally are doing that. If you read AOS, the Bone Reapers attack Khornate sites and like rituals and stuff all the time, and they steal all the skulls from the offerings, which makes the Khornates fucking furious. And it's one of my favorite parts of Bone Reaper lore because it's fucking funny. Because they'll try not to, so often they'll just avoid the Khorne worshippers. They'll just go around them to like sacred altars and stuff, take all the skulls and peace out, which is super fucking funny. And it makes the Khorne worshippers really butthurt, which is great. Sean Steele, could Sorby made that Khorne quenches all of his arms of war in the blood of those who have been slain in his name using any magic represented in the blood? Yeah, 100%. I would Definitely. Say that would be very likely.
That for me sounds very likely. The blood aspect of Khorne is often forgotten when they do their descriptions beyond lakes of boiling blood and blood is splashed and everything, forgetting that blood is a liquid that has multiple potential uses. And the number of forges that are around Khorne's divine realm are significant. So I think the answer to that is definitely, certainly yes.
Yeah, plus quenching in blood is such a ridiculous fantasy trope that has existed for time immemorial.
I mean, that's proper dialing up to 11 rock, isn't it? So yeah that's Khorne for you.
Yep. 10,000 ants. That's unsettling. Are Biggins equal to Chaos Warriors and Black Orcs equal to Chosen power level? That's a really broad brush to throw out there. I would say generally no. Chaos Warriors is more equivalent to like Black Orcs, and Chosen are just kind of up there.
Chaos Warriors suck. They're hard.
Yeah,
they're proper hard.
That being said, that's
the number of times that I'd be facing off against a Chaos army, and there'd be like 20 models on the other side, and I look at my army, and I've got 140, and I'd be like, crap. And I'm playing greenskins. Yeah, and the Chaos army is just sitting there going, yep. And you know what's going to happen if I get into combat with you. You're freaking dead. Indeed, the very first ever tournament winner for Warhammer was playing Khorne army. I helped him make it here. And his Khorne army was Chaos Lord, 5 Knights, 10 Chaos Warriors, and that was about it. And he went against armies that were freaking enormous, and often including Chaos Orcs, Chaos Orcs, Big Guns, and et al. He would eat them all for breakfast because Khorne kicks ass. And Chaos Warriors.
It's worth noting that when you're dealing with like raw physical strength and raw physical tenacity, like Black Orcs are like, and Chosen are like, I'd say they're pretty 1-for-1. But when you deal with like quality of armor, quality of weapons, skill at arms, Chosen are like just a whole other thing.
Yeah. And People often don't like this. They don't like individual factions having groups that are better than others because they are always pitching the factions against each other and they have their favorites. For example, elves in the background are better than almost everything. They're not as strong, but they are far faster, greater weapon skill, and far more intelligent. In the same way, Chaos Warriors are better at combat than almost anything when it comes to simple mortal on mortal combat. They just are. And sometimes in the Warhammer game, that is very accurately represented. In that, if you play Warhammer with a Chaos Army, you have very few models. If you play with Skaven, you have fucking tons of them. They're literally pouring out of your boxes.
That's the thing is that, like, yeah, sure, like, Chosen are going to be better than a Black Orc, but you also get, like, 4 Black Orcs for every 1 Chosen, which evens things out a bit. So, you know, there's that.
But if you do end up with a one-on-one army, you're going to find a Chaos Horde, if it comes down with, say, 40,000, and it's against, say, 40,000 Kislev army, they're going to eat it for breakfast.
Yeah. Chaos, like, if you get into a fight with the Warriors of Chaos, you're a melee fight, you're probably going to lose if you're going one-on-one. It's not going to be a good time.
It's not
Charles, is the whole prayers thing Khorne has an AOS backward compatible into Warhammer Fantasy? You previously said prayer magic was basically human only. Is it backwards compatible? Sure. Yes. There are priests of Khorne in the setting that have existed for a super duper long time. They're mentioned. I actually had to look them up because the wiki was super not helpful. But they do actually have
wiki.
Yeah.
Oh, there's nothing like reading an article in wiki that's about something you've written and go, no, you've got it all wrong.
Yeah. Normally I can like at least get like a source from them so I can go look it up myself and be like, okay, I get it. But like in this case, I couldn't even find what I was wanting to find. I had to dig it up. But in a couple of books that date way back, like we're talking like 5th, 6th edition era, there are mentions of individuals like blood fathers and blood priests. And what they are is they're literally just shamans of Khorne. So they belong to the cultures like the Hung, the Kurgan, or the Norse who worship Khorne. And they are people that have etheric powers. And instead of casting spells, they work more like priests and demon summoners. And that's their specialty. So in Total War, could they exist as being like priests? Yeah, sure. I don't say why not. Now, is Games Workshop going to agree with that? I have no idea. GW is on a whole thing right now where they're trying to separate AOS and fantasy, and it's really stupid and doesn't make any sense, but it's not going to stop them from doing it. And I don't know if they're going to look at like Total War and go, no, you can't have Priests of Khorne because that's an AOS thing. They might do that. They might not. It's impossible to predict because it's just up to some corporate asshole that's having a fight with an internal studio.
You know, what you'd be really looking for, if you're looking for something that reinforces the setting as it currently stands without necessarily drawing upon Age of Sigmar too heavily, you're basically looking for the equivalent of some sort of blood priesty thing. And I'm deeply against calling it, say, a blood father, because that's just gender nonsense. Given that, you know, Valkia started as a blood father. That just sounds weird. It just sounds weird. And there's no need to do that when you're literally making up terms, because that's what you're doing. I've been the person making up the terms, and you're just making shit up. So you can call it anything you want. No need to use a gender term unless it's something that specifically works for that. And you would be looking to just basically create something that, say, for example, your unit kills 5. Every 5 it kills, it gets a blood letter. Bum, 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 because this character's in there. And you get yourself aspects of, say, summoning units or bringing extra things to the battlefield without necessarily having to use magic.
A blood speaker. Sure. Great. Yeah, cool.
Something like that, for example. Blood speaker, to pull on what Mornington President just dropped into the comments. But yeah, something that speaks to what is ultimately them being, you know, slaughter priests, people who are responsible for making sure the blood flows, or in other ways, making sure Khorne isn't pissed off with you. What do you have to do to make Khorne happy? And I'm the person who knows, because I'm the one that's willing to perfect everything that Khorne's interested in.
Yeah, I will say that based on what we've gotten in Total War, if they just like did what they've done with like warrior priests and just made it like a Khorne unit where they have prayers, I'd be like, great. Or they could even make it like a runesmith where they've got like, because the runesmiths, they have like it's not a lore of magic, but it kind of uses like the same general functionality with cooldowns and stuff. They could do that. That works fine too. That, you know, it just depends on what Games Workshop is going to allow them to do. which is the big question mark in the sky. Donoman. So it's less that Valkia is in love with Khorne per se, and more that Khorne adores her because she purely epitomizes everything that he represents. That makes it much better. I think it's just the nature of the language that made it seem like they went with girl equals in love. Yes.
Yeah, and I would argue also a potential missed opportunity there, because if they had done exactly the same thing but used a male character instead of Valkia, I think in many respects it would have landed much more hard and much more but also much more accurately, and we could have had lots of different ways of expressing that. But no, of course, they've gone for Khorne's bloody bride, and it just, it's just, you're right. What they've done is they've dialed on language that makes it look like they're banging on the throne of skulls, and that's very much in their park. They're the ones that made it happen.
Yeah, the person that initially wrote Valkia up in, I think, 6th edition or 7th edition, probably had that in part of their brain, because Valkia essentially replaced Arbol. Arbol was like the big favored mortal, the greatest mortal champion of Khorne. And then they kind of went, you know what? We want Valkia instead. Which, don't get me wrong, I fucking love Valkia. She's awesome. I like her a lot more than Arbol, to be honest. She's got a lot more going for her. But there is definitely someone who was in that writer's room that was like, oh, call her his consort, because, like, he likes her so much. And thankfully, nobody went so far as to be like, they bang. So we can look at it and go, okay, well, clearly
they bang. Yeah. But you know what? I reckon I could write a pretty good story where indeed they do bang, because I'm not against banging in general. Gods bang all the time. In fact, core component of gods, when you look back into our own mythic histories, is that gods bang everywhere. Even the most unbangable god is banging someone.
Strikes me as like asexual because he's just so on the violence.
Yeah, but indeed, but breaking up those stereotypes is sometimes a good thing. None of the Chaos Gods really work particularly well for going beyond their natural areas of absolute obsession. So breaking that up is not necessarily a bad idea. I'm quite happy with gods banging everywhere. When I did, for example, the Tome of Salvation work, one of the core components of that was showing that the gods were banging behind the scenes too. For example, there's a story where Shalia gets approached by Manan, where Raya and Manan are banging, where Ulrich and Raya are banging. They're all banging each other because they're gods. And the gods are a reflection of mortals. And there's one thing that we do as people is that we also bang a lot. It's pretty much necessary for the continuance of our species. And the gods are nothing more than a representation of us. So having them all banging, even the ones that don't bang, is not necessarily bad, but having said that, I prefer if Khorne doesn't. I still think it could work.
I think you could. I think it's better if he doesn't. You could, but I think it's better if he doesn't.
Agree.
Anyway, okay, we already did that. Godzilla, thank you again for that. Karananarak versus Kratos.
Kratos will win because unless I'm playing him. Bars! Fuck! Rage quit!
Yeah, Kratos, because of like the whole concept of what he is, he would just body everybody because he's Kratos. That's what he does. He kills gods. That's his job. Laughing God, do either of you know the reason for the xenomorph conehead skull design that Khorne seems to favor so much? I don't.
Yeah, the old one with the big log. If you take a look at the original Bloodletters, that was originally, as I recall, that was originally put in place by Anthony, wasn't it?
I mean, they're still pretty cone-headed these days.
I'm trying to remember the original design. It wouldn't surprise me if Alien did, in fact, influence it. I haven't spoken to Anthony for ages. He's really old now and he's ill. He did all the original artwork and all the sketches for the original versions of the Realm of Chaos. He did tons of the work. I'm pretty sure he did the concepting for that. I mean, I can message him, find out. The last I saw he was at a show was about 5 years ago, and he was really, really ill. It's him that I bought the original Fimmer image from that you might have seen. That was set up on my wall. Really nice guy. I bought some of his original Realms of Chaos work as well, like some Slanesh symbols and similar, because they were just really.
Might have a stream with DM about that, because that would be interesting if that was true.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't informed by that purely because they are creatures of pure instinct. And it might be sitting in the back of their head.
Yeah. Plus, it's a really spooky design. There's something about that head design. It's like, 5 foot. Yes, he was, but don't worry, he came back. Still loading. Has the Skull Throne made Khorne soft? Though way ahead of other combatants, it feels like Khorne doesn't fight that much since he has no need. A chair could in some ways mean stagnation. That is I don't think so. I don't. Because God's, you remember, he's not a physical entity. He don't play by our rules.
He doesn't need to exercise.
Yeah.
He is pure rage. He is pure calculating Khorne, blood for the blood got Khorne. He literally couldn't be any better than he already is. Simply sitting on a throne in no way means that he is becoming lesser or becoming indolent. He is exactly what he is. Cannot be better, cannot be worse, cannot become soft unless the very concept of Khorne were to become soft, which is never going to be the case. So in this particular instance, I would say you're thinking about it in very, to use the words of the Borg Queen, 2-dimensional terms or 3-dimensional terms. You're thinking in very simplistic material ways. He's a god.
Yeah.
Sitting on a throne will in no way impair him.
Donovan, I like the idea that Khorne doesn't like Greenskin that much because they don't fight with rage in mind. Instead, they fight for fun or just out of, as we talked about, kind of an instinctual nature. Yeah, that is fun. Yep. Does Khorne have any tactical-minded leaders or all just rage monsters? No, he has some tactical geniuses in his roster. They are unfortunately relatively rare compared to the opposite, but they are out there.
The issue with Khorne is that if you play with the rules as they are and you run with them, if you get the mark of Khorne, you become subject to frenzy, which means you become subject to, on the battlefield, becoming an idiot and not a general. And Khorne in particular favors those who come in direct man-on-man conflict. Khorne is very much a deity that favors those that fight directly, not sit at the back being tactically minded. Now, that doesn't mean that someone can't become the best close combat warrior that there is and also have a mind that is tactical, but the tactical aspects of it are generally secondary to their physical capability.
There is a really good book by Josh Reynolds, which is The Road to Skulls, which is a Gotrek and Felix book. But it features a Khorne warlord as the big bad. And he's a really good example of a Khornate who is very smart. Now, when he gets down to it, he fights like you would kind of expect him to. But there are a lot of moments throughout the book where, especially when he's dealing with his various lieutenants, where some of them outright accuse him of not emulating Khorne like he should, because he's not just a wanton berserker. He's a lot more calculating and careful with how he does things. And he has to defend himself from a religious standpoint. And he has some really, really interesting dialogue about how he justifies what he does, because he walks a really careful line, but he knows that he walks a really careful line. And for him, it's more about reaching a greater goal of violence through victory, as opposed to just any violence when you lose. And he's got, it's a really good book. I highly recommend it.
Yep. Worth looking into that one.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it's not part of the strict timeline of Gotrek and Felix. So there's no books you really have to read before it. You can kind of just jump into Road of Skulls and it's fine. Cause it's kind of one of the side stories that nobody really knows when it takes place. So it's a really good book. Phil, so would you say that because it's focused on working through the material world and domestication, Khorne is actually more of a god of predictability and patterns? Are his followers prone to obsessions and hyper-focusing? If so, I find this just really interesting.
Yeah. I mean,
I think you've got a really good argument there. Yeah.
And all of the Chaos Gods are very much about that. And I am... There is... if you look at the wider lore, there is questions being posed by that with very clean answers. The very fact that the Chaos Gods are pure obsession on a particular front speaks to where they originally came from as well. But I think that's possibly for another stream. This one here, we've got quite clearly Khorne, and Khorne is fixated on blood for the blood god, skulls for the throne of Khorne, battle, war. 100%.
Yeah, that's the technical term.
Battle, war.
Yeah, so oh gosh, what yes, okay. Let's see. Vampire souls are bound to their bodies, but a vampire skull and the throne have interesting properties. Yes, it would. Big time.
Yeah, definitely. I find this one interesting because it's one that's not really been picked up and run by anyone, because no one's really sat down and thought about the metaphysics that are going on here. Vampires are, by their very nature, entities without souls that lie in the aether. They are bound entirely within the material realm, and how the material realm has more than one plane of existence in it that is perhaps not very well known. It's not just simply what you can see in here, because you also have let's say, where ghosts sit. Where ghosts sit inside the realm of the material realm and can't really be seen, and they can fade in and out. That is part of the material realm, and vampires are 100% there. They have nothing in the aether at all. So if you take off its skull, you have to literally pick it up and somehow get it over there, because the soul won't break free from the body, drift off into the aether, and then that would materialize as a skull or something equivalent on the other side. It's not how vampires work. Indeed, you could argue that getting that vampiric skill from where it is into the aether might mean that that vampire could never resurrect again. And that would be super fascinating too, because vampires, by their very nature, even if you kill them, they're not dead in the Warhammer world. No matter what you do to them, there is a method of bringing them back, Nagash style. And there will always be a method of reincorporating that vampire if you can get its bits. Because then you just get all those bits together, resurrect it up, and ba-ding, that good old elixir that it took all that time ago, down through possibly multiple sires, reinvigorates it, and we have our vampire back. And that's happened multiple times through the course of time in the Warhammer world. This, however, does feel like it would break it. And I feel that that, in turn, would make vampiric skills something that would be probably sought after. There would be certain cults that would be fascinated in getting hold of them, certain blood cults amongst the Khornate worshippers and possibly the demons that would be focused on them because they themselves are unique, they're fascinating, and that's something that our predator-like, let's say, skull hunters amongst the Khornate worshippers would be super fascinated in getting their hands on. So I definitely think there's something in that, and it's a good one, Byfoot. Thanks.
Yeah, that could actually make for a really cool story. I could actually see that being like how someone ends up becoming a demon prince level of story. Could be really good.
Yeah,
like killing a vampire, dragging his skull all the way up to the north. Yeah, that could be a whole thing. So does Khorne have a second throne? We're going number 2. Once again, moving on. Like our gaming, Khorne has a tendency to punish his followers or champions who go against what he wants. Why was Taurux the brass bull punished with the tiny neck hole? So in that case, that wasn't Khorne. That was the herald that was sent to Taurux by Khorne to essentially grant him this great gift. Because the thing that Taurux did is that Taurux, being Taurux, when he was getting invigorated with all this demonic power and being gifted a brass impenetrable body, Taurux bit the head off of the herald and murdered it. And by doing so, which is hilarious, but essentially he insulted the shit out of that herald. And while the herald can't go against what Khorne wants overall and like kill it, he was able to out of spite, influence the gift enough that it left a weak point in a very vulnerable place where should Taurux be struck there, he would die. So that was due to that particular herald, not due to Khorne himself. Though it is a funny story, and I love it very much.
And arguably, the herald's nothing more than an extension of Khorne anyway.
Yes, and there's that. In which case, you also could have the funny thing of imagining that Taurux quite literally bit off Khorne's head for trying to take him a gift.
Ooh, a mistake.
Yeah, and the beastmen wonder why the Dark Gods don't give them things.
Wow.
God. To bring it back to the Citadel itself, what is the true importance to Khorne / the setting if it were ever taken? Would it damage Khorne like the burning of the garden did to Nurgle? Essentially, yes. That it would be, the impact that would have on the greater Warhammer world and the great game itself would be immense.
So I'm going to take a slightly different angle and draw back out of it. Now, if we can imagine basically a square, it's broken up into 4 equal parts. And each part has a good old chaos rune of one of the 4 chaos gods in it. And this represents the 4 individual realms within the realm of chaos that are held by each one of the chaos gods. And at any one time, these squares are pushing against each other. And some of them are becoming a bit smaller and some of them are becoming a bit larger. And the Khorne one is generally always the biggest. So the first thing to have very clear in our mind is that Khorne almost always has the biggest chunk of this big square that sits in the realm of chaos. But let's just say that this did indeed happen. That would suggest that the square had shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. The others had increased and increased. And it doesn't just simply mean that there was a war in the Aether that Khorne is losing. It means that the overall game, for want of a better description, is being lost by Khorne. The great wars that go on in the Aether are not necessarily literal wars. What these are representations of the waxing and waning of the individual Chaos Gods and their power, their overall ability. They can never vanish because the very concepts of those gods are ingrained into the very nature of the mortal realms, meaning that there is always going to be a manifestation of Khorne no matter what. So ultimately, the answer to this question is can't happen because Khorne will always exist. And whenever Khorne gets into his weakest place, the very core concept of Khorne stands up and pushes it back again because that's what happens. Khorne pushes it back. But let us then take the next step and let's say that the gods are literal entities. They aren't. So you shouldn't view them like this. Khorne is the realm of Khorne, not just that figure that sits on the throne. Khorne is the realm of Khorne. Khorne is that entire aspect of the Aether. All his greater demons are basically just him. It's all him. But let's say they are literal entities. Khorne is banging Valkia beside his throne. He's sitting there running his big, huge, massive strategies from this throne. The realm is just the extent of his power, and others have pushed in and have pushed him back and managed to take his citadel and kick him out. What does it mean? Fuck all. It means he's angry because the Khorne entity is all that matters. So you've basically got two sides of this coin. One, the whole thing is Khorne, and if the whole thing is Khorne, it can never happen. It is one of those things that could only occur if Khorne himself were to be wiped out as an entity. Never happening. Or alternatively, the Khorne entity itself is a real thing, and if that's the thing, it literally doesn't matter where he is, because if he's outside his citadel, inside his citadel, or whatever, it's nothing more than the waxing and waning of his individual powers. So the stories around it would be spun. Oh, Khorne was weak. It all went wrong. He was brought to his knees. He was kicked out of his citadel. Everything was terrible. But eventually, of course, the sky rained with blood, and Khorne struck down into his own citadel and reclaimed it again. Loosely, the question here is very material, and it's not a material situation. The question here is, what happens when he loses this part of the Aether? And if he loses that part of the Aether, which is the core component of him, then you're saying, what happens when Khorne no longer exists? And that is the question that underlies that part. In the same way that burning of the Garden of Nurgle, that speaks to Nurgle losing badly. The very concept of Nurgle losing badly. And that is something that very much could occur because Khorne is so massively ascendant, and I would argue so is Tzeentch. Although Tzeentch is very much more circumspect about it.
Yeah, there have been times throughout the histories where it's like each of the dark gods has had their asses respectively handed to them because of events going on where like Khorne's realm has shrunk, and there are like a good example is like there's the entrance to Khorne's realm is a great fortification called the Bastion Stair. And it's this giant fucking fortification that looks like a set of like a stairway, but each step is like the size of a fucking city. Because it's the steps for a god, not mere mortals. And it is a place where a lot of mortals have journeyed to, and they attempt to fight their way through it to earn Khorne's favor. And it's like full of demons, all sorts of horrible things and stuff. But there are times that Bastion Stair has fallen. And it has been taken by other powers in the Great Game and defaced and messed with and stuff. And then the Khorne's legions, as his power swells again, they come and push everybody back out. And so things like that happen where you have various aspects of the realms of those gods being kind of sieged or torn apart, but the core bit is nigh on impenetrable outside of like literally an apocalyptic scenario. Of like, sure, Nurgle's garden may burn, but never his manse, never his little mansion at the center.
I mean, a looser way to describe it, I suppose, and this is going to be kind of loose, would be that in times of great peace, when the world has settled, that is when Khorne is at his weakest, and the blood is not flowing, and the stair falls, and Slaanesh rises.
Yeah, the other three are like, woohoo!
The other three are moving at pace, and then as all of this peace trips to war, Khorne becomes resurgent again. But this is, again, a very material way to view the immaterial realm, the material realm is a reflection of the material realm, but it also lies beyond its constraints and its rules. So this is almost theory hammer rather than necessarily being nice, clean answers, because for things like this, we don't actually have clean answers. But we can say that Khorne as an entity, by the way that it's been created and written, is effectively card-coded into the Warhammer world and the setting. You can never get rid of Khorne, which means that you can never get rid of its central bastion, because the central bastion that is Khorne, effectively, can never be taken. Or you take the flip route and you say that Khorne isn't hard baked in and is a literal entity that walks around, literally sitting on that throne, literally thinking about stuff, literally banging Valkia. And if that's the case, well, you've got to kill Khorne, and the actual realms that it loses are nothing more than power plays. You know, hey, he's controlling less at the moment. He's Khorne. He'll come back.
And I will be the first to say to anyone that's like, I'm confused, that it is confusing, especially because different writers will give you different answers. Of that, you could point to literal examples of the gods being treated like they're physical beings, almost. Of, you know, like, even if you take Khorne, no, granted, I don't think this is a great example because it makes almost more sense in an etheric sense, but like the betrayal of Skarbrand, where Skarbrand waits until Khorne's back is turned and then attacks him with all of his wrath and like barely leaves not even a scratch, like a tiny scratch on Khorne's armor. And Khorne's like, oh, you bitch, and throws him physically out of the realm of chaos. And that's where his wings get shattered and his face is all messed up and stuff. That heavily implies that, okay, Khorne is a physical entity because he got attacked when he turned around, and he also like picked Skarbrand up, took him to the top of the brass citadel and chucked his ass and made him into a meteor. So it is confusing. So yeah.
I'd say less confusing as multifaceted.
That's fair.
And because it's multifaceted, it's very easy to look at only a single facet and think that is the truth. And when you do that, it means that the other ones, when you look at them, you go, well, what the fuck does that mean then? That doesn't make sense. It's a multifaceted situation.
Yeah. Donovan, the wiki. If you want rage, read the Everqueen page where it contradicts itself in 2 paragraphs saying she's chosen by the Phoenix King and it's a hereditary title. Yep.
Do not get me fucking started.
That will be a really fun rage stream. The
Everqueen.
Undeniably one of the worst written things in Warhammer Fantasy, because different authors have had very different ideas on how that thing's supposed to work.
Yeah, I just did the entire for our own game. I just did the entire household of Inarian, as in from Inarian downwards.
Oh boy, you hit a star and go, oh no.
And it's fucking messy in the lore, because the lore doesn't just contradict itself. It abjectly states things that cannot all be true. And some of it is so hideously sexist and weak.
It's dark elf propaganda. That's all it is.
The only thing that makes sense is that it's a hell of a lot of propaganda. Wow.
Nils, missed this one, and we'll miss the rest of us to watch it later. Well, thank you, Nils. We appreciate the super chats.
Salute you for dropping by when you could. Always good to see you.
When we get to 235, I am going to stop the super chats for a little bit because there's a couple last little places I want to talk about in Khorne's Realm, and then we'll come back. Elemental, Karanak versus Mazzy versus Orteklis would be a great who would win if you guys were to bring that back. Is it coming back one day? We
got format we like.
Yeah, we have it filed under potential Wednesday night streams, but currently we're doing the Tarmakon Brothers series, which we're having a lot of fun with. But that only has
adoring, by the way.
Yeah, but we only have 2 streams of that left, which means we'll pick up something new after that. So we might mess around with a couple things, but we'll see. Wednesday nights are experiment nights, so that sounds sexier / worse than I meant it to, but whatever, it's fine. We're moving on. Hammond, sitting on Khorne makes Khorne soft. Yes, it does. Don't sit on Khorne. Bloke person, Khorne's linked to brass, but I've read it's being used by other entities. Is this because brass has magical properties or magic retaining properties in Warhammer? I'll let Andy tackle that one.
No, it doesn't. Brass is interestingly not given any particular qualities in any of the writings, although you'll find that in some of the Khornic writings, it's given a special importance to Khorne. Brass is a metal, and how you make brass, I mean, none of it's particularly important or interesting in terms of the magical theories of Warhammer. So in this case, no. If you were looking for something that was specifically Warhammery, it would be obsidian or lead for anti-magic, for example. But no, brass doesn't do any of those things. It just is culturally tied through to Khorne for a variety of historical reasons. But yeah, there's nothing that's in the magical side that at least I can recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, I believe it's more a circumstance of Khorne favors brass, therefore imbues it with properties, as opposed to brass having innate properties that are reflected onto Khorne.
Yeah, it's because it's tied through to industry and that Victorian concept of machine, chug, chug, cog, cog. And that brass, it's much more iron and brass from that perspective. It is far more speaking to the use of those metals to convey something from a storytelling perspective. And it then got moved on to Khorne because it told that story better. Khorne being the god of machinery and willing to use technology in warfare, where the other gods were using magic. This, however, was eroded with time, but nevertheless, the demons kept it. The brass was a core component of what Khorne was, but it lost all of the technological benefits that it once had.
Yeah, brass, it's like, it's funny. Brass is one of those things where a lot of the metals or materials in Warhammer will usually get a little bit of an explanation of why they do what they do. Brass is just one of those ones where they're like, Khorne likes brass. And you go, why? And the authors seem to look at it and go,
because he does.
Because he does. It's kind of like the numbers associated with each of the dark gods. Why do they like these numbers? I don't fucking know.
Because they do.
Donovan, what does the Shattered Causeway in Khorne's realms lead to? I know the map isn't how the realms actually are because of ether non-physical stuff, but seems to lead off the map, so to speak. Could it go to a realm that doesn't... Okay, so the map of Khorne's realm, which is pseudo-represented in Total War Warhammer, but the map that they made for the Demons of Chaos book is a really cool map. It's not what you would actually experience if you were there. It's more just a representation of some poor bastard that went there. But there's a lot of really cool things in Khorne's realm, which we're at 235, so I'm actually going to talk about this for a minute, because there are a couple things that I want to highlight on it that are really fun. Most notably, so the Shattered Causeway,
you've got, if you're going to highlight anything, you've got to start in the top right-hand corner.
We'll get there in a second because that one's more of a that's more of a
because, what the fuck? Holy shit! What?
So Shattered Causeway does maybe lead off somewhere, and it implies that it used to lead. It's a causeway. It used to lead off to somewhere else. I would probably, if I was personally having fun with it, I would put that very much under the War of Heaven situation, where there was a battle. It did lead somewhere important, and that bridge got shattered in the process of that war, separating those realms.
I'll add just one detail before Sotek goes through the whole lot, and that's that the Blood God's domain, the realm of Khorne, is shattered and broken in general. Unlike the rest of them, which have got large areas that feel like they're themed around each of the gods, the theme here is warfare and the repercussions of it. Consider it to be a bomb site. It is a war zone. It is where everything has already occurred, and what is left is shattered and broken. The land is a mixture of half-baked islands and cracks and crevices and hell, all filled with bones. So you might be able to get across from, say, one place to another, across, say, the cracked lands or something else. But that's often because they are absolutely bestrewn with bone. And you're crunching your way across, and the bone is covering the land like water might cover elsewhere. And you can get across many of the great cracks because of all the bones that bubbled up from below. So yeah, it's a shattered, broken realm of awfulness. And amongst that, we have some specific places.
So we'll go ahead and start with the brainfuck one, because we can just get it out of the way really quick. The person who made this map is, I will say, whoever it was is hilarious. And had a good sense of humor, because in the very top right of the map is a big old swirling portal that he calls the Eye of Terror, with no explanation anywhere in the book. He just puts the Eye of Terror on there as a big fuck you and moves on with his life, which is really funny.
Yeah, totally. So this lies to the heart of, Games Workshop's constant teasing of 40k and Warhammer being linked. To begin with, that wasn't teasing, they just were. And then it was teasing. And then it was, they just are. And then it was, they aren't. They absolutely aren't. And nowadays it's much more, well, the demons are the link. There is the warp, the immaterium. And in the immaterium, all things happen. All things are linked. All worlds are linked there. You got to remember, 40k, for example, is the future of our world. The future, 40k is the real world. 40k isn't some bizarre, distant fantasy realm. It's our world. And in our world, eventually you'll have the Eye of Terror. And the Eye of Terror will link through to the Warhammer world. So, hey, we're linked to Warhammer. Warhammer's real, man.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. This is the proof. Warhammer's real, man.
That just makes me feel so happy. So a couple other really interesting places. Interestingly, so the Forge of Souls is a place a lot of people are really familiar with, because the Forge of Souls is that when demons are banished, according to later lore that I have written, their essence goes back to the Forge of Souls, and they basically have to be kind of put back together before they are often allowed to return to the material world. Not always, but in some cases. Demons, as a punishment, sometimes are banished to the Forge of Souls, where they have to endure being remade before they're allowed to resume their activities. Some of them will make pacts with the Forge of Souls, which implies that there's an entity within the Forge of Souls that is independent, that can make people into soul grinders in exchange for a form of service, which is fascinating and very not explained, which is really interesting, of that there's some kind of powerful entity. But according to these maps, the Forge of Souls technically falls within the domain of Khorne, just barely, because it is a forge, which seems intentional, even though it's mostly treated as a neutral ground. When you actually read about the forge, it says that it's a neutral ground between the four gods, but it's on just the edge of Khorne's realm, almost as in Khorne's trying to pull it in and just can't, or just because it's so closely related to him. But it opens up a really interesting eyebrow raise.
Agreed. I think this is a perfect example of one of the locations that would probably be moved to the center of the map if they did another map, because it would make sense.
That's what they did in Total War. They moved it to the middle.
Exactly. And I think that's very likely to occur if they did, say, a 9th edition or an Old World edition of the map. However, I also think it's worth noting that this is the Aether, so be aware that every single thing that you see here as a location is almost also a demon. Don't view them as places per se, because that is a very material way of viewing them. Everything in the Aether is made of etheric stuff, and etheric stuff is the stuff of demons. And anything that gathers in any particular location to any strength becomes almost sentient because of the way that the Aether works. The enormous sentience that is Khorne is all of its realm. So the Forge of Skulls is almost certainly represented by a demon. And that is almost the anthropomorphization, although that's not quite correct, because that's the almost like making it a human, the demonomorphization, well, whatever. But you will have each one of these places are going to be represented by various demons. And in some cases, these are demons that are going to be storied for living in that area, or for commanding that area, or for hunting in that area, or something similar. But each one of these will have a greater demon. Consider it like if you're looking at a hierarchy of hell, one of the dukes of hell, where at the very top you've got the Prince of Darkness himself, Khorne, and underneath him he'll have all of his dukes that run each one of these realms. And it's not so much that they're running the realms as much as they are the realms. And that's a good way if you're trying to figure out different ways to build greater demons for your own world. That's a good way of trying to figure it out. You might go, so what is the land of the Forgotten that lies on the edge of the realm of Khorne? And another question instead might be, what represents that with a greater demon? And the second you start building those stories, it all begins to form into something cool.
Yep. So the last couple of places to talk about that are just super fun little notes. The Bastion Stair, if you ever want to explore a representation of it, is really, really fun. If you go play the Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning game, it's one of the in-game dungeons you could do, is fighting your way through the Bastion Stair, and it's super duper fun. And the final battle is a big fight with a big nasty bloodthirster, which is great. But one of the things that's super interesting is that if you can get past the Bastion Stair, if you're able to work your way all the way up the Bastion Stair and get to the lands beyond it, you go through the Wrath Gate, which is the entry to Khorne's realm. And the Wrath Gate actually plays a much larger role in Age of Sigmar than it does in fantasy. But the Wrath Gate is quite literally a gigantic, horrifying gate that you must pass through to enter the realm of the Blood God proper. But once you get in, you arrive in the fields of Khorne, the hunting fields. And what's interesting is that they are an actual fields and meadows. But it's noted that it's a very bizarre place, because where the Bastion Stair is kind of a twisting, nightmarish mindfuck in and of itself that is almost impossible to get through for a mortal. Possible, but only just. That the fields of Khorne are noted to be disturbingly ordered, where you enter a place where you will find rows upon rows of corpses covered in gore and blood, lashed to stakes that are being used to grow a bizarre form of plant. There are these blackened flowers that almost look like they're like kind of like burnt, and they're just these nasty plants that grow from the soil where these corpses are staked on, and they bear a form of black fruit. And there's notes that thousands of demons tend to these plants, which are more like crops, in the fact that they're ordered and have like aqueducts and ditches around them filled with gore that are used to distribute, and that demons upkeep these fields and take care and collect the fruit that's harvested from them and vomit and void their bowels of which is just gore because they're cornate demons, to fertilize these flora. And there's no explanation of what these plants are or what their purpose is or what they do, which I hate but also love at the same time, because that's a really fucking fun mystery of what is the purpose of these plants, because they're treated like crops, as like more like a harvest field, as opposed to like a true meadow in that sense, which I find so interesting.
Yeah, the harvesting of souls, just for want of a better description, is a common artistic trope whenever you're dealing with chaos in a multiple of different ways, and sometimes given a very literal, there's a harvester with a scythe and look at all those ears of corns with little screaming faces on it, and then that's just taken to its next step with each different type of either verbiage that is dropped to try and describe it, or art that is used to attempt to try and basically take the maddening, vast landscape that is the realms of chaos and turn it into something that can be understood by a mortal mind, which is ultimately, as it's often described, again in the various corners, as pointless. It's hubris. It's an attempt by a mortal mind to put order on something which by its very nature is disordered. But it's interesting to note that that's also kind of a lie, because it's not so much that they're adding order to the disorder, it's they're basically trying to understand something that is not within their capability to understand. That would be better. It is beyond their ability. And the bits like that are maddening details, so to speak, that don't seem to necessarily fit the rest, are the parts that in some respects I feel better represent the realm of chaos as a whole, because the realm of chaos is simply beyond mortality to understand. And those great fields of shrieking corpses being fertilized with blood to create these horrendous flower things. Yeah, that's the sort of hard rock that makes the realm of chaos awesome. So I'm well up for that.
Yeah, and then you have the meadows, which as you get closer towards the Brasilia, culminate in the final big piece of flora you'll find, which is the Tree of Souls, which sounds like a great time. You also have things like the Skull of the First, which is a fascinating thing that opens a lot of questions, which the Skull of the First is a giant satellite. So like think of a moon type thing of an immense skull, the size of a moon, just hovering and drifting over Khorne's lands, which with the Skull of the First implies a pretty fascinating story of what was the first skull that Khorne ever took or was offered to Khorne. And why is it so big? And oh my god, that looks like it has a really horrifying story behind it, doesn't it?
I'm straight. Yeah, that's a story waiting to be told, and I would like to read or write that one. I think
honestly, I would not be shocked if that came up with the direction Lawhammer's going in.
I would not be that shocked either.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna hop back to super chats now because really the rest of them are just kind of like forges or like random volcanoes. Because, like Andy said, most of Khorne's realm is kind of more of a cracked wasteland that just looks like bombs are going off constantly, and people fighting. Mostly demons, demonic hordes. Every once in a while, you'll get your awesome, cool, badass mortal like Arbal the Undefeated, who's out there fighting endless battles. Though, when you're dealing with true endless battles of mortals, there's actually a place known as the Eternal Battle, but that's actually more within the Chaos Waste, not within the realm of Chaos itself. And it's a super interesting place, but not the point of the stream. Okay, so where was I? Here. Tyrant, what factions would be Khorne's favorites to fight? Whoever he can beat, probably. And everyone.
I don't even think whoever he beat, just he rage filled. He's taking them all down. I'm not entirely sure that he will have favorites per se. But having said that, though, I don't have any favorite factions in Warhammer. This is definitely the truth. I like going through them all. I like writing them all. But interestingly, when I'm playing Total War, I do prefer playing some factions over others, even though I don't necessarily favor one over others. So for all I say, yeah, wherever the blood flows, inevitably we can't help ourselves, can we? If there's a particularly peaceful group, turning them into a warlike group, that would go down very well. So you might find that he particularly favors kicking living shit out of high elves, who by their very nature would prefer not to fight and would deny the Cain that lives within them. But instead, he brings them to war and makes them turn into a bloody warlike group. Suddenly, those are the sort of elves he likes to kill, because they are, in turn, the sort of elves that are trying to kill back in return. So that might be the sort of thing that turns it to a favorite, but in the end, it's all going to be speculation.
Yeah. I would say who's his favorite is whoever's fighting at that moment. Okay, we answered this one from Dino Man, and I got that from Tyrant. Yep. Darius, back to your Lamian episode. If the gang from Always Sunny in Philadelphia were each a vampire bloodline, what would they all be? I don't have time to answer this. I haven't watched that show. I don't know their names. I just know the memes from that show.
Well, I've watched every Always Sunny episode there is, Darius.
Can you find that out real fast, Andy?
No, it requires too much thought. And they also don't fit very well.
I mean, I know they're all horrible people, but
I'm actually imagining them. Oh no, let's move on for a second. Thank you very much for the super chat, Darius, but I don't think that's the best one for a Khorne stream. That's my excuse for not diving on it right now. But I am probably going to laugh about it all day while I try to imagine Danny DeVito.
Danny DeVito, the Strigoi, yeah. Yeah, Herman, Khorne's massive strategy impressed Valkia. I don't think that's what you particularly attracted her with, though. You know, you can make the argument there. I mentioned Khorne may truly lose to Slash sometime if he ever gets caught in mid-romp with Valkia. That's why he won't do it. It would make me vulnerable.
Again, Slanesh is not the god of sex. Let's make that very clear. God of excess. Very different.
Yeah, the Citadel stands as long as we buy Citadel miniatures. That's the Citadel of lead, but you're also not wrong. Suggested name for all Arball's Fleshhound, War Mongrel. That is very on the nose. I would not put it past GW.
That sounds perfect, Dynaman. Exactly the sort of thing that they would choose.
Yep. So the Citadel is just one part of Khorne that either can't ever fall or can, but it doesn't really matter because Khorne is still active, forced. What do you think the purpose of the strongholds of the gods are? What makes them stand out?
Purpose. That's such an interesting word. Purpose. Right. So I think in some respects that doesn't. The Chaos Gods exist in the realm of chaos, and the great realm that is the let's say the realm of Khorne pretty much is Khorne. That is Khorne. The whole thing is Khorne. That is what Khorne is, and the realm and all of the crazy little broken up bits, including the Brass Citadel at the heart of it, is the god. And the core of it, in the case of Khorne, is the Brass Citadel. So the purpose is, it's the core of the god. It's at the most corny part. The most Nurgle-y part would be where Nurgle resides. The most Slaneshi part would be there. And as you move out towards the periphery, they are the less corny part, per se. Meaning that we have ourselves overlap and crossing the ideas and demons that rebel and things that don't necessarily fit within just Khorne's remit because it's sitting on the edge. Now, this goes right back to the original conceptions for the Realm of Chaos and pretty much hasn't changed as you move from different edition to different edition. And that is that each of the great realms lie within the Realm of Chaos or within the warp, if you go back to the oldest terminology. And in the warp, they aren't so much just the god. It's like the great swirl of emotion that is that god. And the heart of it would be the representation of the most corny part, I suppose. And the reason that it can't ever really truly be taken is because to do so is to effectively kill Khorne. And Khorne is hard baked into the Warhammer setting. You can't kill Khorne.
So, okay. I just had a thought that is completely unrelated to everything you just said, but it is it's such a fucking like, oh my god, I love this that I have to say it now. So I was just randomly entered my head while you were giving that whole little speech because it relates to what you were saying a little bit. So turning back a clock for a hot minute from when we were talking about greenskins and Khorne, about how Khorne likes the hounds, he likes the trained aspects of violence, the things that are kind of under control. I have a leash, so forth. And yet talking about how yet all demons are him and all things are parts of his aspects. And all of a sudden, my brain just had a light bulb moment with it completely makes sense why he exiled Skarbrand then. Of taking a chunk of himself that is literally just uncontrolled rage, completely off the leash, and going, get the fuck out. Yep. Like, this is not in service to what my overall whole desires. That makes for a really fucking good, like, ooh, that works so well.
And I think for an even better one, you can, by doing that, you can then, by extrapolation, realize at the heart of Khorne is a great dissatisfaction with the whole concept of a leash as well. And the idea that Khorne was leashed, and that's what he fights against. That's why he's so angry. That's because that's what he is. And you can then begin to look at it and go, why did Khorne? And it all begins to unravel and make some sort of...
That makes the whole... the myth is a probably more accurate way to say it, of Skarbrand way more important and way more fucking fascinating of what is going on there. And also does a good job of why Skarbrand is the most important greater demon, because he represents something really fucking fascinating. I fucking love that. I love when Lorebeard moments give me a aha moment. Those are always good feelings.
Like that.
Ooh, I like that. All right, let's see. Downman, I know forges don't have many details, but if it were up to you, how would you differentiate the forges that are mentioned, such as the Foundry of Rage, the Forge of Rage, and the Slayer Forge? There's also the Forge of the Eight. And then, of course,
the Forge of the Eight.
Yeah. So because we don't have any details on them, it'd be impossible to say. For speculation purposes, you'd probably want to play around with what kind of things would be produced from them. As far as, like, do they produce like a particular kind of weapon, or is one of them where the juggernauts are created, or is one of them where certain forms of armor are forged, or where the hellblades of the bloodletters are created? Like, you would basically, I would work on, if you were working on it, you'd probably want to take different concepts and ideas and play around with them and not keep it just as purely physical items. I would also play around with the idea of, what if one of these places is where Khorne forges hatred in men, you know, where you have these whispers going into people's ears that are being influenced by the dark powers, where they have like a slight amount of corruption, and there's an unnatural thing eating away at them, eating away at their soul and turning them to hatred and rage. And these are where, and one of these forges is where those more sinister aspects are being quite metaphysically forged by certain types of demons, which makes for a horrifying and fascinating concept of, like, oh, there's a place where all of your deepest, most irrational hatreds is being created. That's a fun, horrible nightmare vision. And so, yeah, I would just play around with crazy things like that.
I have nothing really to add to that. I broadly agree. You'd be looking at taking each one of the forges and trying to speak to aspects of Khorne and what Khorne is and what Khorne creates, and bringing those to life using each of the different forges. I would probably also look to try and create something unique for each one in terms of how they manifest their local demons, or those who are the slaves to darkness in the local area, and the equivalent of the greater demon that leads them to. So that gives you a really strong set of characters that you build, a strong set of individual units. So it meant that at a later date, if you ever wanted to create yourself some sort of army of the Slayer Forge, you'd also have the core components in place for doing so.
Yep. Cole Patterson. There's also the idea that brazen both means brass and bold. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, the term brazen is very, very Khorne coded and heavy inspiration there. So yeah, absolutely. Mr. Pig, would you call his followers children of the Khorne? Only if they're below a certain age. But yes, yeah, absolutely. Cole Patterson, if they brought back the Mardag, he'd be there.
Yeah, he probably would. And again, Mardag, yes, is the answer. In fact, it's quite like the Mardag would be in or close to the hunting fields or something similar. With the Viadag being elsewhere. But yeah, there'd definitely be something to that.
Donman, the plains and the fields can represent the logistics of warfare, armies marching on its stomach, etc. I know that doesn't make much sense because demons don't eat, but it could make sense from an etheric, emotional, metaphorical point of view.
And yes, and I think that's the sort of thing that people, when they're creating this shit, or when they're just reading it, often forget that you go far beyond the physical and the sensible into the metaphorical and the often horrific, particularly when you deal with the realm of chaos. And things that do stand as metaphors for other things of that ilk are not just worth creating, they really do help ground each one of the chaos gods when you're attempting to move beyond the simple creation of, here's another lake that's full of boiling blood. Look at that volcano. Oh, yes, there's some screaming skulls. Ah! It gets boring, and chaos is anything but boring. And if you look at all the crazed artwork that we've had for it over the course of the decades, it really works at its best, and it shines when people go deep into the metaphors that lie underneath it all. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. And running with things like that will allow you to build a far more dynamic and interesting realm of chaos where Khorne happens to reside.
Yeah, I also think you could do a really fun play with there being flora within Khorne's realm that is like a plant-like representation of cycles of violence, of the sense of using corpses to feed plants that then themselves are producing things that will become corpses. Almost a representation of that concept of violence just begetting more violence. So yeah, a lot of fun things you could do with that. Maybe the skull of the first god that Khorne killed. Yeah, very possibly.
Well, that would certainly be one option, and I don't think necessarily a bad option. I think for my own one, I already have an answer, and it's not that.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good option.
Yeah, there are a lot of there are a lot of fun ways you could take it. Like, especially if you're working with the idea that the gods are like these independent things that existed without necessarily the help of mortals. And that like the dark gods kicked off a war in heaven by doing something, having it be the first god that was murdered by Khorne or just killed through violence works really well for that. But you could also have it as the first skull ever offered up to Khorne and led to its own series of cataclysms. So there's a lot of different ways you can play around with that.
Good answers.
Yeah, I've always thought that ticks, leeches, and mosquitoes should be part of the visual themes of Khorne's demonic hosts. Is there a reason there aren't? Yeah, parasites tend to lean much more heavily into Nurgle's domain. That being said, I would not say that it is impossible to encounter a Khornate situation where you have someone that has like weird bug-like manifestations.
I mean, chaos is chaos. It can manifest in almost any way, but each of those manifestations are consumption, and they're consumption-based rather than being flowing of the blood or violence-based. Ticks, leeches, and mosquitoes are drawing upon the blood, taking it within for their own sustenance. They are doing something relatively natural. There's nothing weird about it. Khorne is way beyond that. So whilst it does deal with blood, and there's certain sympathetic notes here, I would say in general, beyond just mutation being weird and anything can pop up, they're in quite a different realm to where Khorne normally sits.
Yeah, because the big thing there is it's the taking of blood for a purpose as opposed to letting blood flow for its own sake. And for the violence of it, you know,
the violence of that makes the
leeches and mosquitoes are not violent creatures. They're quite the opposite. Let's see, Ricky Chapman. You know, the garden in Khorne's realm makes sense in a kind of Zen warrior kind of way, in a really fucked up way. Yeah, sure.
Pretty sure Khorne's not the most Zen of warriors.
I don't know if you caught the part where I said that they're fertilized by legions of demons vomiting and defecating gore all over them, but you know, sure.
That's one hell of a Zen garden.
Warrington Crescent. Of course, Khorne is on the leash. We all talk about the collars of Khorne.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's actually just because I do think it's worth reiterating. There is clearly a story there because Khorne is lashing out. And to lash out and to be an entity of such rage, there has to be a reason. And for all we can say, yes, but the gods are just great big swellings of emotions, and that's the emotion that Khorne happens to be. Yes, but he's also sentient. The gods are sentient in as much as these things can be. There is always reasons, and in the Warhammer world in particular, is not just reasons. These entities came from somewhere. And that is the great question that Warhammer in general tends to not answer, because to do so is to potentially diminish what they are. They don't like doing that. But there's definitely something there. Yeah, who leashed him? And I think that is a beautiful question.
Yeah, I mean, I can already think of like 2 possible answers that would be like insane and fascinating, like really, really fun. James Workshop. Chaos isn't supposed to be boring. Just try and stop me from copying and pasting 6'11" dudes in black armor fight over and over. Yeah. Most bored.
You're not wrong, Bill.
I don't need patience. I'm going.
All my Zinc warriors look the same.
Yeah. Still loading. Maybe a praying mantis is more of a corn bug. Yeah, I would agree. Or like, yeah, just looking at like, if you were going to deal with an insect, the insect world has some horrific violence. Wasps.
But they don't. This is something that I think it's very easy to mix up, because they're all doing it generally for what is essential reasons. They're doing it for survival. And it's not that they're horrific. It's that we give them, because we have emotions and we look at things and we grant them that horror. So the only reason that certain creatures and entities that are beyond the, let's say, the purpose of them would gain these traits is because we as a people look at them and go, this is the epitome of that. And yeah, praying mantises to a degree, pretty awful. And they could arguably be attached to it, but it would require vast swathes of people all believing and thinking in that direction. And they kind of don't, because it's an extreme example of a small species that's little known in the greater Warhammer world.
Yeah, I would say it's when you're dealing with species that have been influenced by humans, funny enough, where they become violent for the sake of violent.
And in particular, take a look at, say, for example, species that go beyond their standard because they are influenced by a parasite or by a disease. Now we're talking about something that's no longer working within the natural order, and that is wherein lies the Chaos Gods, moving beyond the natural, the normal, to an obsessive.
There with the rabies raccoons.
But much of that lies at the heart of Nurgle and the way that Nurgle manifests. So you'll find that there's going to be quite a lot of border realms between Nurgle and Khorne. And I think that some of the examples that are being brought up very much could become borderland issues. So to speak.
I think dogs are really the #1 place to start of that. Like, think about, like, you know, the way humans have domesticated dogs. If you've ever seen wild dogs, like, they're dogs, but they're, you know, humans are not in control of them. There's too many of them. They will kill for sport, and it is gnarly.
Yeah, and again, you're looking for more than sport as well. You're looking for rage. They're not doing it for fun. They're not doing it because they're interested. They're not doing it out of curiosity. What you want is fucking rage. What you want is abject, uncontrollable anger because of what has happened. That doesn't happen in the animal kingdom to any great degree. The only time that we really see it being expressed in an understandable way is through dogs, because because we are so closely associated with dogs, man's best friend. When a dog goes beyond that, we immediately go, "Oh, dogs barking rage, fear!" And then you can see why Khorne is associated with dogs, because of the inherent species bias that we have towards angry dogs.
I think that actually can make a really good argument for why all of Khorne's animalistic creatures, with the exception of the hounds, are machines. They're not actual beasts; they're mechanical.
Yeah.
Because that's the purpose of machines, is that they fulfill a purpose, which is to inflict violence. For just its own sake,
filled with rage machines.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really compelling way to look at that. Of that, Khorne does not have a lot of natural beasts, because the beast, you know, kills for a reason. Might not, you know, from our perspective, might be like, that's kind of a horrifying reason, but yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, and that actually description.
Or hollow out your eye, or whatever the hell else that creature does, which is potentially horrific from our perspective, but from its perspective, it is just following through its basic biological.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of why juggernauts are mechanical instead of just being big rhinos or big hippos, which are terrifying creatures when they want to be. I mean, hippos are ornery motherfuckers.
Hippos, don't mess with a hippo. Freaking hell, they're so fast.
They are. Yeah. They have very low tolerance for bullshit.
What did we conclude on there since we're nearing the edge of our stream?
I mean, we got just last 1 or 2 super chats, but we are out of time. Last one, actually.
We are. Look at the time. Just noticing it.
Khorne Zen is still Zen, in my opinion, just with more blood and gore. And we're going to build a Khorne warrior monk monastery. Also, look up the snakehead fish. Very Khorne-like. Snake head fish.
I don't even know if I want to know what that is.
Why are they illegal in the U.S.? Oh, my.
Okay. Yeah, not so good. So my concluding mark.
Yeah, those are unpleasant creatures. Okay, cool.
My concluding mark, and this one's going to be really, really short. Really, and that is that Khorne has long been, as a god, not really understood. And I would argue only one god has been more misunderstood than Khorne, and that's Slaanesh.
Oh, yeah.
Tzeentch has been broadly understood to a great degree, and Nurgle has been mostly understood, but Khorne in particular is always cast as this rage-filled, unintelligent, stupid god that creates followers that are proper monsters, and that's it. And some writers have fallen into this, and some writers have purposely tried not to write that because they've tried to do something new. I'm going to make my Khornate champion, but make him a strategist. Without realizing that at the core of all of the Khorne writings is the man that sits on the throne. Now, God might be a better way of putting this, but not a god that rages, not a god that sits there losing himself to rage. Quite the opposite is the case. Khorne is undisputedly the most powerful of the four, repeatedly described as the most powerful. In even licensed games, he's the most powerful. If you go to, say, Chaos in the Old World, a game created by FFG, Khorne is the most powerful of the four gods you can play. Always goes first, always gets the first stab because of the simplicity of how Khorne's tactics work. Khorne is always interested in war, and we're always at that, aren't we? And Khorne is, without any comparison, the winner at most times of the great game, beating Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle at most turns. Now, you could argue that's simply because he hits them on the head first. But no, that's not how conflict is waged. It's only one part of the great game, war. And war is the ultimate fallback, you could argue, for when politics fails, if you will go back on classic examples of power. But that's an argument for why Khorne always comes out the top, because when it comes down to it, he'll just kick you in. But it's only one.
The pen is mightier than the sword. All right.
Yeah. But that's only one part of the bigger whole. Khorne is not stupid. But Khorne is embodied rage. Pure anger. But it's controlled. Khorne is also a forger, a warrior, a general, a winner, a winner, a winner, a winner. And gets beaten back. Winner, winner. It's his servants that are fucking idiots. The slaves to darkness that are utterly underneath his thrall, who have been taken from whatever life that they had before and turned into pure vehicles for Khorne's rage in the material realm. And that is the great untold story. Why is Khorne so obsessed with leashing the world and also destroying it? Why is Khorne so obsessed with the collars that he puts on everything? So obsessed with his anti-magic? Why is so much of its existence centered around sitting in that brass citadel, winning? What is the story? And the brass citadel stands, I would argue, as a metaphor for who Khorne is. Because everything that's in that citadel, whether it's the great boiling blood that it uses in a massive moat to hold everybody out, all the greater demons that it keeps around it to protect it at all times, the enormous amount of guard dogs, weaponry, skulls, all of the forces it surrounds itself with suggests a few things. Number one, Khorne is at heart scheming, and two, a coward. Because he's not out there. He surrounds himself at all times with those, and he looks for the best fighters to drag himself and guard him. From what? What leashed Khorne? Why is Khorne so angry? And the Citadel speaks to that, because everything about it suggests an entity, a god, that is obsessed with winning. Because clearly at some point it lost. Clearly at some point something happened that god will never allow to occur again. The word coward is too strong. I'm going to use a different word. Afraid.
Yeah, traumatized. Yeah.
It's got trauma. We have a god that represents the trauma of war, because that's ultimately what Khorne is. He's the god of war and the trauma of war. And now he is obsessed with recreating the blood flowing again and again and again and again. He surrounds himself with motes of it. He is obsessed with skull taking. He is obsessed with defeating his opponents. Why? And that, I think, is the great metaphor that lies at the heart of the Brass Citadel, that lies at the heart of Khorne sitting on his great skull throne, inflicting upon others what was almost certainly once inflicted upon it.
Yeah. Oh no, you're not. Oh no, you did not just like suggest that the Skull the First is not. Oh, you did.
I certainly fucking did.
You little bitch.
That's only one potential.
That is spicy. I love that. That is so spicy.
After all, there is no time in the aether. There is no beginning and there is no end.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you could have a dead god still sitting on his throne, angry that he died, or that he's going to.
There's a host of ways it could be imagined or reimagined. There's 1,000 cool stories. But I think that is why I really like Khorne, and I really like the Citadel that lies at the heart of Khorne's realm, because it speaks to a character that none of the writers have actually grasped. They've looked at Khorne and they have really just fallen back on that same thing again and again. A completely uninteresting, frenzied dog that lashes out with anger without ever once going, why? And I think that's what I'd like to finish on with Khorne.
Man, we should have started with that. That's fucking spicy.
Oh, but it's nice to end on the spice, isn't it?
I know.
Something to think about at the end of the show.
Okay, last couple of little super chat things we're wrapping up. The Skull of the First is colored with Tzeentch colors on the map. Isn't that kind of interesting? Though that could also just be because the Tzeentch realm is kind of nearby and they let the color tone shift as you get closer to the various realms.
I'll add one on to that one just to say it. Just because there's a great skull there, the Skull of the First, doesn't in any way mean that it's happened yet. Yeah,
could be that it's there's so many things that you could okay, I don't have time for this. I gotta move on. Given the sheer hatred of Slaanesh, I wonder if when they were born it cost Khorne a great victory. That's kind of an interesting idea. Of Slaanesh is deeply tied to whatever traumatic thing happened for Khorne. That's spicy. Khorne seeks to conquer and prove he's best among the four. I mean, he's proven it a lot of times. But there's also something... There is the eternal thing of that if you let the gods... Like Andy's little speech there, which I loved, absolutely loved, informed the idea that there is like a sentience and a form of thought that's very alien and difficult to grasp going on with the gods, of the four fighting the great game isn't just because they're chuckle fucks that are in it for the giggle fest, but that there's something actually happening there. There's a purpose behind it. Opens up, because like traditionally a lot of the times it's treated as just a giggle fest thing, which is boring and dumb. But the idea that there's actually an interesting story there, why, is like, oh boy, that opens a lot of really fun storytelling opportunities. Not success. Well,
I'm rather amused that when you see a boob snake, your first thought is sex. Hey, Hammond, you've outed yourself.
Yeah, really. all the snake sexuals are gonna expose themselves if they're not careful. Mr. Pig, also maybe it's just 40k, but isn't Khorne the oldest of the Chaos Gods? In fantasy, when they prescribe the age of them, yes, he's the oldest.
Yep. Khorne is generally described as oldest and most powerful, although it's far more of a 40k thing to actually locate it in time as Khorne being the oldest. Where in Warhammer, the 4 Chaos Gods are just sort of, they're much more obliquely described. Slaanesh wasn't created, say, 10,000 years ago in the Warhammer world, unless, of course, it was.
Yeah, there's a pretty consistent quote that's like, oh yeah, it goes Khorne's the oldest, then Nurgle, then Tzeentch, Slaanesh, which is interesting because it's different than 40k, which goes Khorne, then Tzeentch, then Nurgle, then Slaanesh, age-wise. So there's an interesting difference there. But we also don't have the big creation moment with Slaanesh, unless we do. But we don't. Unless we do.
I mean, it's very, very easy to birth Slaanesh at the Cataclysm. Very easy.
Yeah. Like if you play Total War Warhammer, there is a loading screen quote that talks about the birth of Slaanesh. And talks about that it's quite literally a multiversal event, quite literally leaning into the whole 40k and fantasy are connected through the Realm of Chaos, which, like, fine. I mean, Realm of Chaos could go anywhere and everything.
It does.
So
officially, Games Workshop's 40k world is attached to Warhammer through the Realm of Chaos. They just are. They're all the same demons. They're all doing the same thing.
Yeah, so
and they manifest on different sides.
Yeah, so somebody comes up to me and they're like, yeah, the Cataclysm was also the birth of Slaanesh. I'd go, okay. That's all right. Yeah, okay. Sure.
I mean, time-wise, it can be made to make absolute perfect sense because it can happen 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, pretty much on the dot. All right. So with that, we are done for today. Hopefully you all enjoyed the show.
I know I did. That was a good one.
This was really fun. Me and Andy had our typical thing of getting in and going, Brass Citadel, not a whole lot to say there. It worked out. So
it did. That was a lot cool. Thanks, guys. You all rock, and your questions were astonishingly good.
Yeah, there were some really, really good questions in there, and I had at least 2 aha moments, which I fucking love those because those changed my perspective of Warhammer literally for the rest of my life. So those are great. Yeah, that Scarbrand thing. Ooh, I like that. I like that very much. That makes his character make so much more sense. It makes so much more sense. Anywho, be sure you join us on Wednesday at 6 p.m. CST, midnight BST for the Tzeentch Brother. And then just a reminder, the week after that, we'll be doing like kind of a wrap up where we'll talk about the whole storyline we did. I'm gonna try and make like a little PowerPoint presentation with various like pictures and stuff. That should be fun. Hopefully I still remember how to use PowerPoint. I haven't touched that program since I was in high school, I think, but we'll make do. So yeah, please take care. Appreciate you all for watching. Make sure you check out Lawhammer if you haven't already to watch the series. They're about to hit on the finale of part 3, which is super fucking exciting. I'm so fucking hyped. So that'll be on Friday.
Friday. Holy crap, it's coming fast. I got prepping to do.
What is it? 1 p.m. CST? 7 p.m.
I don't know. It's 7 p.m. UK time.
Yeah. So 7 p.m. UK time. So 1 p.m. CST on the Lawhammer Twitch. So you should be there for the live show because it's gonna be fucking amazing.
I have literally no idea what's going to happen, but I am aware of at least one thing that could happen. And if any of you out there know the Enemy Within campaign, our version of the Power Behind the Throne has a potentially more explosive culmination point than the first part. And if you know anything about how the first part ends, you know that can. Right. Spoiler time. This is a spoiler for the first part of the Enemy Within. I'm warning you now. Spoiler, awooga. I think that's enough. Okay, by the end of that, you can open a Chaos Gate in the Empire. An actual gate directly through to the Realm of Chaos can open in the Empire. And the conclusion we're about to hit is potentially more explosive than that. They avoided that last time, which is a good thing. But for any of you that are aware of the various plot beats we've had so far, there is something underneath. Midnight.
I'm sitting there going, my dumbass party already opened the Chaos Gate in Bogenhofen. We're already way ahead.
Anyway. Our party didn't. They avoided it. And I'm very keen to see if they avoid the next horror show.
Yep. All right. Thank you all again. We'll see you Wednesday. And vote will be on my channel. So here in just like an hour or so, vote will be on my channel. And the next stream, the Wednesday stream will also be here. But then the next Sunday Lorebeards will be on Andy's channel.
Yep. Certainly shall.
Bye-bye.